What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of I'll Call You Right Back podcast with me, your host. What a great week we got ahead of us. You know, we just been having a lot of great weeks. Last week was insane. The shit with the Demon of Brownsville Road is wild, and it was a great episode. Bobby is a wild dude. He's very, very calm and very, very just relaxed. I don't know if I would be able to be like that if I was in a fucking haunted house my entire life. But really, really great episode. He hooked it up with a signed book, and we did the giveaway with that. And, I like giving away, if people come on here and they have something that they like promote or something that they're affiliated with, and they want to give a copy away, fuck it, I'll give it away. It's awesome. Gives people a reason to interact. People just scroll past shit. It's a way to interact. But anyway, this is super weird for me because I never predate episodes of podcasts. I never backlog them, but currently me and my wife are in Portland, and actually we're probably in Seattle right now. Thursday. Yeah, I think we'd be in Seattle. Just left Mount Rainier last night. Sure, it's wonderful. I'm sure it was beautiful. Portland was probably super fucking cool. And Seattle is probably going to be dope too. But I had to, get the podcast ready because I didn't want to have to worry about that shit whenever I was out there. Me and my wife, this is the longest vacation we ever got to take. I'm so excited for it. We got some crazy tree house hotel or some shit in Portland, and it looks insane. Then we got some crazy cabin in Mount Rainier, which looks just bananas. And then it's going to be it's an awesome time. You're listening to it right now. It's an awesome time, I'm telling you. But this week we have a wonderful, wonderful guest to kind of carry along the Halloween creepy. I don't know if he would necessarily call it, I don't know if he would call it creepy because this is his everyday work and this is kind of normal to him. But Kevin Drobish is technically, I don't know his exact title, but I'm looking on his LinkedIn page and it says Distance Education Pathology Instructor at Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. He is one of the coolest dudes I've ever talked to on here. One of the coolest people, hands down. I told him, and I do not tell people that this is my favorite episode. After everyone leaves, I don't do that. But I'm telling you, this was my favorite episode I think I've ever recorded. Kevin is just he's an old skate rat. He's been skateboarding his entire life. And I got linked up with him because, I posted on Facebook, I'm trying to find creepy people, do whatever. And Greg from One Up Skate Shop tagged him, and then I texted him. I was like, what's this dude all about? And he was like, oh man, he does some wild shit. Autopsies. He worked for Cyril Wecht. He is just a wild dude. He's real into the shit, got crazy stories, and he also grew up as a skate rat. And I was like, damn, that'll be dope because it's always cool to have a common interest with people. So it makes me feel better whenever I'm talking to someone. But Kevin was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll come on. And I didn't know what he was going to be like, but it turns out he's just a fantastic person, just a great guy to talk to, just very, very full of life, it felt like. And I just had a wonderful time speaking with him. And I just listened through the episode again, and I was just listening to how cool it is. This whole episode is just full of awesome shit to learn. It's super interesting to me. I don't know why I've always been so interested in mortuary stuff, but that episode with Sarah McAlley, that I talked to her a while ago, she's a funeral director. We talked about embalming, we talked about all kinds of wild shit, and for a while that was my number one episode. It definitely was, because I don't know, I think it's just because I have a real interest of the shit. But our episode's fantastic. It's a long one. we talked for 2.5 hours, and I could have talked to this dude for another 3 hours easily. So, we talk about how he got into skateboarding, how he, started Mortuary, started the path down to the mortuary world. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but that's what I could find in my mind right now. But, he started on this path like into his 30s, and now it's like, it's his life's work. He loves it. And you could really tell from our conversation that he is, he's obsessed with his work. He loves his work. He does it for a great reason. And, it oozes out of him. And I was excited to get this podcast done, and I was excited to put it out to you guys. And like I said, I never backlog episodes, so like I've had this recorded for a little bit, and I just been so excited to put these out. But I don't know. I hope you enjoy it. I know you enjoy it, but without further ado, episode 90 of I'll Call You Right Back podcast with Kevin Drobish.
Telephone.
Hello?
Telephone.
I'll call you right back.
Telephone.
I'll Call You Right Back podcast. All right. They don't have no twist off cap, so I open it with this thing. All right. That's my old puck bottle opener. So you're a beer guy, huh? That I'm usually not a beer guy ever. I don't really drink too much, but I'm starting to enjoy the flavor a little bit more. I probably would enjoy it most if I just don't like being drunk.
Well, that's the thing is, it's funny. You got to drink lighter stuff. That's the stuff. Like I said, Voodoo. They just opened a brew pub up in State College. I go up there a lot. And
oh yeah.
Like everything there is big. Like it starts at like 6'5", I think, and goes up to like 13.
What are these? These are like 8.6.
Yeah.
So it's like if I have to, like, I don't know. I've probably been drunk 4 times in my life. So if I have 2 of them, I'll fucking go.
That's a pretty good amount, though.
That's a pretty good amount. You know what I mean? I have 2 of those, but I've been usually, my friends. It's such a social thing now. Drinking is a social thing. Like, IPAs is like, coffee almost, but
oh yeah,
I go there. My wife enjoys it very, very much. She brought this home, and I actually kind of liked it. But we'll go around, and I usually get the flights,
okay,
and just like try a bunch of different shit. And I enjoy it. It's interesting to taste all the different shit and how all the stuff is made. I really enjoy the process behind everything, though. Like that's usually how I am with everything. That's why I do the podcast.
Talk to brewers. There's a good interview. Brewers are always fun people.
They are, but I feel like I won't do it justice because like I don't know too much about it, but I'm gonna break into it.
They'll tell you.
That's a good point too. Me not knowing about it, that'll be a good podcast. Me learning. I just got into like roasting my own coffee and shit.
Okay.
So it's kind of like I kind of am getting into that vein. I'm sure I'll get into some brewers here soon enough. But have you ever done a podcast?
Nope.
Never.
Never.
Do you listen to podcasts?
I just started recently.
Who do you listen to?
Well, it's funny. I've listened to yours, and there's a lot of my coworkers listen to a lot of true crime ones. And I can't remember the name of them. There's 1,000. There's so many.
Yeah, there's 1,000.
But they listen to them, and it's really funny because I usually don't watch or listen to anything about what I do for a living because I just did it all day.
I bet, yeah, that's a good point.
But my wife loves to. So it's kind of funny, like my coworkers will come in and ask me things about the things they hear on these podcasts. And because they know I worked for a somewhat famous pathologist, so they ask me my opinion about cases that are on trial, national cases, things like that. Yeah, and it's funny sometimes because the way it's portrayed in the media is very dramatic and it looks cool, looks exciting, and it's not. Like it's really tedious, it's really hard, and it's really it's weird because in a state like Pennsylvania, like if we work on death penalty cases, someone's life is on the line.
Yeah.
And I've helped put people on death row as part of an investigative team on a handful of cases, and so it's
heavy shit.
It's stressful, yeah, it really is. And at the end of the day, your job is to find out how somebody died. There's no good ending to that. So
yeah, my first experience of even hearing about like anyone doing like autopsies or like crime scene or whatever is I worked at a car dealership whenever I was like just out of high school, and a guy that was a service writer there was going to school to be a I guess what's the term? I mean, he would go to crime scenes and clean up the bodies, and like, what is that? Is that in the...
Well, it depends on what it is, because you could actually be a crime scene investigator.
It wasn't that.
Okay. There's what's called livery services, which those are the people that actually pick up people and take them from one place to another.
I think that might have been what it was.
And then there's also crime scene cleanup and biohazard remediation companies, but those are newer.
Okay.
If you've ever seen that movie, Sunshine Cleaning.
I was just thinking that.
That's it. That's a new thing. And so depending on what it was, but really, it's funny. There's not a lot of regulations around it. There's not a lot of education required for most of those positions.
Oh, really?
Even crime scene investigators, you technically need a high school education, I believe, to work at the medical examiner's office. All you do is get in line and work. They train you.
That's it, huh?
And yeah, there's like to work in lab positions, you need to have a bachelor's, usually things like that. But the actual crime scene investigators, there's not a lot of actual training or educational levels required for it.
It's interesting though, because nowadays we're in this period of time where it's like murder porn. Okay, everything you get on Netflix is you got True Detective, you got Mindhunter, you got Making a Murderer, you got podcasts like Serial and all that shit, and everyone seems to be loving it. And it's usually like you'll see these like bright people and everything like that, and usually thinking about murder and death and everything like that is like a dark, grim subject. But nowadays it's almost like people want it, and I'm one of them. I'm terrible. It's me and my wife. We watch all these fucked up things. Like we just got done with Mindhunter. Do you watch that at all?
I haven't, and it's funny because I had somebody tell me, they're like, you should actually watch it because it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And especially that it's around here and everything like that.
I feel like that adds a little bit more for us. I mean, that it's, they film some scenes right next to my parents' house. Like I could see the restaurant that we go to all the time. Recently, they just filmed season 3 right in the shopping center over here.
Okay.
So I would be waking up to go to work at like 6 a.m. and driving, and you would see like the shuttle buses, and you would see like all the movie trailers and shit like that. So it added a little bit more, but it makes a good bit of sense to, I mean, you're in this all day. This is what you do. So, I mean, I don't know if I would want to design piping like I do it for my 9 to 5. I don't know if I would want to come home and watch shit about designing piping and shit. You know what I mean?
I think what it does too is because some cases wear on you depending on the situation. And it's funny, they're talking about how big like the murder thing and the forensics and the CSI thing is. Murder is like fairly rare on the scope of how people die.
Yeah.
So in the order of how it occurs by numbers, it's natural, accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined. And actually just this past year, I think for the first time ever, there was a flip nationwide where accidents overtook naturals because of overdoses.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was
Holy
like the
shit.
first time I think that ever swung out of the natural, that Nash U lineup. And because we've learned that in school for years. I don't think they've officially changed it because it was only a 1 year swing, but there were so many overdose deaths that were considered accidents that it made that swing. So
that's a shame.
You look in that lineup and there's so many more suicides than there are homicides, but you don't hear about them.
And you said it was natural disasters first.
It's natural deaths.
Oh, natural deaths.
Natural, accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined.
Oh, okay.
And so really undetermined is like a tiny 1% to 2% cases. SIDS, where they don't know how a child dies, is an undetermined.
Huh.
Basically, you'll almost always find out what it was. So really behind that, it's homicides. There's way more suicides, but you don't have suicides usually publicized unless it is publicly seen, unless it's like publicly witnessed.
Yeah.
There's usually not a report about it. So you'd be surprised how many suicides, and there's a huge upswing.
That we don't know about.
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge upswing of suicides in younger people, specifically veterans. And we were seeing that even a few years ago. And so it's wild to see that people are so much into all these homicide cases, and it's so rare that homicide touches people.
Yeah.
Whereas think about how everybody knows somebody that died from cancer.
Yep.
Like everybody knows somebody that has a neurological disorder.
Yep.
Everyone knows someone that's had a drug addiction or a drug death in their family. Or
Absolutely.
An overdose. So it's wild. No one ever wants to talk about those kind of things necessarily in relation to death, but homicide, we're all about it.
Yeah, it's like glorified in some way.
And what I understand about it is, because I've always kind of had this fascination about it from a psychological standpoint, is why do people do these things?
Yeah.
Why do they do it? And sometimes it's very clear cut. You know, like most cases you see in the news, it's very simple. There was like a fight over the television.
Oh yeah,
You know
something
what I mean?
insane.
Things like that, a parking space, road rage incidents, things like that. But some of the wild cases you come across, and it's some of the ones I've worked on where you're just like, you never get an answer as to why they did it and things like that. But some of them mimic what you see on television sometimes, and you almost wonder, is it life imitating art or art imitating life, or is it going around? We had one that was like a Breaking Bad-esque kind of case where this young man had a drug problem, and his father dies of natural causes, like sitting in his easy chair.
Oh, really?
Sitting in his easy chair in the living room.
Yeah.
And the kid has this brilliant scheme that instead of like trying to like get money for his drug habit, he's just going to take dad and put him down in the basement. And he puts him down there for a couple of days, and it's not really working out because he's starting to kind of, break down, things like that.
Yeah.
And I orders one of those 50-gallon blue barrels like you see on
Like in Breaking Bad.
on the internet, gets it sent to the house with the dad's credit card, stuffs them in the barrel, and they finally eventually find him like a week and a half later and things like that. But it's just like, how long? And he was using his Social Security checks to.
So that's why he didn't want to.
But like, how much money do you have? Like, how fast are you going to burn through that? Like, the mentality of it was just shows that there's mental illness involved to some extent. But
Also shows you drugs are crazy.
Well, and to stuff your dad into a barrel, like,
Yeah, like
like that's what it was just so shocking to hear and see that. So it's interesting, and I think if most people were in that room and saw that or smelled that, like that case, things like that,
yeah,
you'd be like, wow, maybe I'm not so interested in this because TV is so sterilized.
That's a good point. You don't get that grossness
it's tactile.
of it.
It's a tactile
That's
experience.
a good point. Yeah.
Death is a very tactile experience, and teaching students how to do autopsies and how to embalm is so interesting because you have to be this kind of almost like this watch guard when they're in the lab for the very first time, because you don't know what your trigger is going to be as to how you'll react to a dead body.
Yeah, I mean,
sight, sound, smell, the sound of like even just the incision. The first time you make an incision with a scalpel in somebody is one of the most bizarre things ever.
I bet it is.
They're dead, and you're helping them, but just to cut into somebody's flesh.
Yeah, that's some heavy shit.
Surreal.
That's definitely some heavy shit. If you're definitely into like the psychological aspect of it, Mindhunter is worth a watch.
Okay.
It really is, and it's fascinating. It's about these two guys who basically go around before the term serial killer was a thing, and they talk to people about reoccurring trend murderers that before the term serial came into play, and they just talk about these people, and it's all based off of true shit. I'm not sure.
So it's like the early profiling, basically.
Absolutely, it's how the profiling of serial killers came to be.
Nice.
And it's maybe I'm just into it, but it was pretty good. I thought they did well with, from a cinematic point of view. Like it was a good show. His story was good and everything like that, and it tended to be it filled that little murder porn void, I guess. But so I mean, I think the curious thing is like, how does someone get into this? Like, where'd you grow up, first of all?
I was born and raised here in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
And I basically left. I moved to State College for 5 years. I was actually working as a musician.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my day job was I was a graphic design artist and a drummer, and that's like what I did.
You still play drums?
I still do, for fun. I ended up doing it for a living for 10 years.
Really?
That's what I ended up really doing when I got to State College, was really playing music. And I moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado for 5 years, and that was where I really kind of broke into music, was teaching lessons. I played every kind of music except for classical, probably.
Wow, that's
literally.
awesome.
And so I'm the kind of person I'd like to just keep learning. I'm like a perpetual student.
Yeah, you want to keep going with it. That's kind of why I
learning.
dive into podcasts.
learning.
It's like you can listen to the same music over and over, but I want to keep filling some information in my head.
Absolutely. And so when I got out there, it was so funny how different Colorado and Colorado Springs was from, Pittsburgh, things like that.
Yeah.
And while I was living out there, my maternal grandfather died down in Florida. And my mother was the oldest of all the kids, so she kind of had to go down and kind of make arrangements with my grandmother, who was, she was in her 70s or 80s at that point, or maybe even 90s. And basically, I ended up going down when I could, and was like, I'll go down and make the arrangements with you or whatever. So we just go into this funeral home, and down in Florida, it's a dime a dozen. There's millions of retirees there. There's lots of funeral homes, things like that. So you just kind of go.
I didn't even think about that, retirees.
You just go down to the street, and there's a funeral home everywhere.
Yeah.
And so they went to this place, and they offered the whatever they had as a plan A or plan B for their funerals, and it didn't really kind of sit with what we wanted to do. We kind of wanted to customize it, and we wanted somebody playing the piano, because there's a bunch of musicians on that side of the family, and just they were so resistant to everything we proposed, and we're like, we're paying you like a lot of money for this, and like you can't like acquiesce us on a couple of these little things. It was a little odd, but they were just really like, it's black or white. Here's the packages we have. We finally got them to kind of bend a little on some of it. Well, so we're having the service, and now knowing what I know as an embalmer and a funeral director and things like that, he was poorly embalmed and poorly cosmetized. So he looked weird, and it's odd because the last time you see somebody when they're dead is usually at the funeral, and that's something we call the body image, where it's the last time you'll see them.
That's why my dad doesn't go into any room with any casket in there. He just that's exactly how he
last thing
he thinks
you're
of
gonna
it.
see them, and it could be good or bad.
Yeah, it could be
So-
because I would say 90% of the time of people that I saw in funerals, they tend to look worse than you remember them.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
And it's interesting because everybody does work their own way in this field, and there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
So it's your own personal aesthetic to what you put into it. And what you have to do to be a good funeral director is listen. Like, you have to listen and watch and pay attention.
For the details.
Like, yeah, exactly. The family will tell you things, and you've got to be able to have an artistic eye in what's called restorative art. And that is cosmetics, the lighting, the color arrangement of the flowers, the clothes, everything, the casket, the way you design the room.
Yeah.
And then the most important part of that field is basically if somebody has died from something that is disfiguring. So car accident, cancer, gunshot, you name it, we can rebuild them and have an open casket. So that's one of the things I specialize in.
Oh, that's okay.
And it's really interesting. So when I now look at my grandfather's funeral, I know exactly what they did poorly. Not only did they give us the bad arrangement, they did the embalming poorly, the cosmetics and everything. So then during the services, they addressed him by the wrong name. They addressed my mother by the wrong name, like more than one time. And at the end of this thing, I was so mad. I have this vein that comes to the top and pulses like right about here when it's about to explode.
Yeah.
That thing was thumping.
And how old were you when this happened?
34 probably. Yeah, I was like, mid-30s. And I was like so mad the next day. I said, I don't know anything about what we just paid like $10,000, $12,000 for. Yeah. But I could do that better. Like I could do that better. And that was the impetus there. That was what lit the fire. And it's funny when you talk to people in this industry, if you grow up in it, well, you're kind of expected to work in it because your dad's name is on the sign, your grandfather's name is on the sign.
Yeah, a lot of it is like a family business almost.
Not anymore.
No?
Big flip. Big change has happened in the past like even 15, 20 years. And so now there's a lot of people coming in for like kind of green like me. Yeah. And they're not necessarily coming in because of bad service. They're coming in from good service. You know what I mean? Things like that. But it's really wild seeing, why people get into it, like what your story is. You have to write an essay when you come into our school, and I get to read them. I'm working in admissions, and I can almost tell like who's going to be one of the best, like top students who will make a great funeral director. and some people, their reasoning, you're not quite sure. Like, wow, like, where did you learn about this that you think that's what this is about? You know what I mean? Because it's a calling, and that's what we tell people. It's a calling. So that happened to me. Back then, I decided within a year that I had to move from Colorado because Colorado didn't have any good schools. And you actually don't even need an individual license to be a funeral director in Colorado. You could go be a funeral director in Colorado right now. You just have to find somewhere to work. But yeah, you don't have to have an individual license.
So before you were 30, I mean, before this instance right here, you had no desire. I mean, you had
nothing
information to do this?
Nothing at all. I mean, I had always been interested. It's funny. I'd always had an aptitude for science, but never knew what to do with it.
Yeah.
Especially like chemistry. But I had read, every book about like true crime, things like that for years. Like the profile, almost like the big books, things like that.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. I just always had this interest in psychology, and just never knew what to do with it. Well, I didn't. Then I find out that like mortuary school is a ton of science, a lot of chemistry, biology, and the other half of it's psychology. So I thought, wow, I could probably actually do this. And looked at the two best schools in the country. One was Cincinnati, one was here in Pittsburgh. And I wasn't moving to Cincinnati, so
I don't blame you.
But I actually had family here. My dad and my mom still lived here, so I actually was able to move back here with it was before my wife and I even got married. And we moved back here, and within 3 years, within 3 years, I started mortuary school. Got delayed by 1 year because I tore all the ligaments in my left knee skateboarding. And had 5 reconstructive surgeries and almost died.
Where were you at?
We were riding Polish Hill of all places, like that goofy little bowl there.
Yeah.
And just kind of dorking around at the end of a long session. It was literally like 7 days after I got married. Thank God I was on my wife's insurance.
And you ripped your knee apart.
And just shredded. We have it on video.
All right.
Horrible. 5 reconstructive surgeries. And I got a septic staph infection on number 4, and I almost died.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like they tend to be, you could almost die from them.
Yeah, so it was wild. It delayed school by a year, completely changed my outlook on life, really. I mean, like when you get that close to dying, it was wild. It was actually the week of Halloween, which is my favorite holiday. I had to spend it in the Southside Hospital.
So you were pretty bad shape.
Oh, I was like an ICU. I was like hallucinating.
Holy shit!
It was. They said I was close within 6 to 8 hours of dying, and
damn.
So that delayed everything. I couldn't walk normally for about 10 months total. Then it took about a full year to rehab and get like my knee back on track.
Yeah,
and so that delayed my school by a year, which ended up being very beneficial because if I would have went in when I initially did, I probably wouldn't have got into doing autopsies. Because that happened in my first semester of school there. I go in, I was the oldest in my class at 35. And now that's like commonplace. There's people in my classes now in their 50s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a huge re-career now.
Wow.
Huge re-career. Yeah, absolutely. So it was wild. Back then it was kind of a newer thing. But the first semester in my class, there was a guy that came in and taught the one part of the anatomy and embalming course was about autopsies. We get a lot of them. We get a lot of autopsies that we work on. So this guy came in to teach us about it, and they said, okay, this guy has been doing autopsies for 35 years. He's worked for Cyril Wecht. He's also a funeral director, so he can kind of give you a very different perspective on, autopsies and kind of death investigation. And basically offered at the end of it, if anybody wanted to ever come observe one, talk to him after class. And I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. That's awesome. Like that's, doctors get to do that kind of stuff. So I went over, this was at Carlow University actually.
Yeah.
And they actually were teaching a program. It was a biology major program that had a specific focus in forensic autopsy investigation.
Wow.
One of a kind in the country. The only kind that was an undergrad in the entire country. There were graduate programs similar to it, but the only one in undergrad. And so I go over there, and the first day I'm there, I got put to work. Like, he knows. He's like, you know your way around a lab and things like that. So he's like, grab a scalpel and start working. And I was like hooked. Like, it was wild. It was the greatest anatomy class I never had.
Yeah.
because I got to see every aspect and component of the human body one part at a time.
That's a good. I mean, that makes sense.
And it became this amazing thing where I was learning reverse engineering. And then I was able to turn that around. And in the funeral side of things, especially in that restorative art component,
Yeah.
when I see how a gunshot works from the inside out and the outside in, I can then put it back together much better. So the skill sets were crossing over like exponentially. Like literally, I'd see
Kind of like a perfect storm of all this stuff of interest.
I'd see one thing in the lab the one day and then get to apply it in the other one the next day, things like that.
That's a good point.
And then working for somebody like Dr. Wecht, not only was he a pathologist, but he's an attorney.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why he's such the expert and so, I mean, he's the smartest person I've ever met in my life. It was really scary working for him because he has like zero tolerance for mistakes.
Oh, wow.
But he's just one of the absolute smartest people ever. And what we would do is we would learn about the evidence that we were getting in the case, and then he would explain how we would use it in court or not. That was the astounding part, was learning the jurisprudence aspect of, here's what we collected, here's why you have to collect it a certain way, and here's how it can be, broken apart in court. That's why what you see on like Law and Order and CSI, it's also whitewashed and condensed, and there's always the surprise that they bring out.
Yeah.
And there's none of that. Court cases are really boring. They're like really boring. But that's the thing is it was wild to have that kind of education for free, basically. I did an internship there for about a year and a half. And
I learned all kinds of shit.
Oh, man. I literally almost got like a master's degree without paper because I was learning not only from him, but every time we would have a different case, because we worked for 8 different rural coroner's offices. So everybody outside of Allegheny County did their work. So we did Westmoreland, Armstrong, Greene, Fayette, Clarion, like Indiana, you name it. We did all those. And like even like up into like Venango, places that don't even have like an actual like lab to do work in.
Yeah.
So we would get all these various cases from all these different counties, things like that. So I would work with forensics state troopers that were from all these different troop areas. One guy, I learned my fingerprinting from an FBI specialist. The other one was one of the only like dozen latent fingerprint experts in the country. He's the one where he can just look at him with his eye and match him and things like that.
So you're learning all this shit from all these top dogs.
It was wild. I mean, learning like my ballistics training from a guy that worked for the CIA and the FBI, things like that. So it was on the job training like you just could not get, even if you were taking a master's course.
Yeah.
I know someone took a master's course at Waynesburg in forensic investigation. Well, these guys come in and like lecture for you for like an hour or something. I was with these guys all the time. I learned how to do photography. I'd always been an amateur photographer, especially in skateboarding. But like learning how to do forensic photography, it's wild. The first time my photos showed up like in a press conference on the news, or like in a trial and things like that.
Yeah,
and it's intense. So it was so great to get that kind of education for free, and like I said, it always kept crossing over back into my funeral service work and things like that. Because when you're working in that field, you know everybody in funeral service, the forensic side, and then also organ procurement and organ donation is the third prong in death, I guess, death fields.
I hit up someone that does, I can't remember the acronym that they have, but it's...
CORE.
Yeah. Center for Organ Recovery. Mm-hmm. Is that what it is? So I hit someone up.
Yep.
I tried to get someone on there, but they said that they couldn't come on here because of like privacy issues and shit like that.
They are under so many different umbrellas and restrictions,
which is understandable.
I'm not surprised that they did that. Most of my students from Carlo all work there.
Okay.
So I almost wonder who you'd talk to, but that's the thing is these jobs are all tied together.
Yeah.
So that if you're a good technician, if you can do autopsies, you can embalm, and you can work for the organ procurement organization. So it's wild. Yeah, so you kind of know everybody in the business.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's interesting. We were talking about Sarah McCallie that you had interviewed before. That's how I met her. She was working at a funeral home, and I was called there to do a private autopsy, things like that. And so it's interesting. And then she ended up working at the school with me. She comes in and does occasional teaching in our lab with us now. And it's
fascinating
funny.
to talk to her.
And I know her boyfriend from skateboarding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he actually works at Commonwealth Press, and that's actually owned by skateboarders.
Yeah,
and it's like, and Dave Colley that
Dave,
works there.
Dave.
Yep,
Yeah,
I've known Dave forever. He lives
great
like
guy.
in my neighborhood.
Always a nice guy.
But Sarah's boyfriend works there, and one day I was in there talking to Dave, getting some shirts made and things like that, and he's like, "Hey, you're a funeral director, right? And do you know Sarah McCalley?" And it was just like, it was just so funny. Yeah, it's a very small industry, and
everyone knows everyone.
oh, and the longer you're in this town, the smaller and smaller the circles kind of get sometimes.
Oh yeah, small world for sure.
It's very interesting. I tell people the longer you're in the business, I said, the more you're going to have your circle get closer to you through death. You're going to work on your neighbors, your friends, things like that.
Wow.
And sometimes it's almost, you don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
I ended up, having an interaction with somebody that I took care of through embalming, and it ended up being like somebody that was like a neighbor's, loved one and things like that. And I didn't realize at the time because he looked a lot different on that table than he does sitting on the back porch.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. All right, so that's some heavy shit to get into. Okay, first things first, I usually do an opening segment with everyone. It's called What's in the Cup? What's in the cup? All right, so what's in your cup, first of all?
All right, I got water because water is everything.
Yes.
And then we've got Southern Tier cold pressed coffee Pumpkin, which is limited.
It is limited. It's pretty damn good.
It's
now,
really good.
Before I keep beating your ears about all this shit, I'm pretty curious about your skateboarding background. If I could rewind just a little bit.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So I mean, that's been a pivotal part of my life growing up. It's like that's where kind of all the cool shit that's ever came into my life has came from. I'm always interested to know how people got into skating. So like, how did you get exposed to it?
Well, in the 80s, if you got into skateboarding, it was usually tied to two movies.
Gleaming the Cube.
There you go. Okay. And that was more of mine. A little earlier was Back to the Future.
Oh yeah.
But usually Back to the Future was a little more primitive, but Gleaming the Cube was huge. Okay.
I remember seeing it for the first time and saying, man, I want that diamond plate skateboard so bad.
I mean, Christian Slater was the cool kid at the time. Then, of course, right, like it had the Bones Brigade in it, and they were actually characters in it, and so yeah, I wanted to be Tony Hawk. And literally, like I remember, I ended up, I think literally, it was like that Halloween, right? It was right around like October. I remember I got a board for my birthday, and the Volterra Wall Ripper.
You remember it, huh?
Oh yeah. I found one a couple years ago that a kid had, and I tried to buy it from him, and he wouldn't sell it to me. And it was like a piece of junk.
I remember my first board too. I had a DNA Jimmy Chadwick board.
There you go.
I got it from the Edge.
It's funny. You always remember those. Like,
yeah, you remember.
You always remember them. And it's so funny because back then it was when it came with all the plastic junk on it, like the tail guards
and all that
everything,
shit.
And the lappers. And but it's really funny. I got into that. And I was just learning to ride around and things like that. And I lived pretty far out. Like I lived out in Beaver County, pretty rural. Where I grew up was farm country.
We were just skating parking lots, curbs, and shit like that.
Well, we had one smooth road, so we had a launch ramp and a little slider box we built, and just that's all we did. Like when it rained, we would be in the garage, just back and forth. And so for me, it was really interesting. It was my breakaway from team sports. I grew up playing team sports my entire life.
Oh, okay.
And like I played hockey, soccer, lacrosse, baseball.
Till when?
Up until like literally like about like 16 years old when I got into skateboarding.
Yeah.
I was really disillusioned with sports, and plus I grew up in the Ohio Steel Valley in the 80s when the mills were closed, and the way to get out was either your brains or your brawn. It was football or the band in Ambridge was big, or you were smart. And I didn't really like paying attention in school back then. So,
or you get stuck in the mill for the rest of your life.
Well, and there wasn't many mills left to work. I mean, it was pretty
That's
dead.
A good point. Yeah,
pretty dead.
Yeah.
So, and we were seeing everybody's dads that had already been laid off and were these heavy alcoholics, things like that. And you saw the bleak future coming.
That's true.
So you're like, I got to get out of here somehow. And to rebel against going to school in Ambridge, it was like, well, punk rock, hip hop, heavy metal, and skateboarding were like an easy avenue for me.
That's all of it.
Being a kid from the suburbs, but going to that cruddy school, it was like an easy thing, and it's easy to wear the costume and all that. But it all fit together. I just wanted to rebel against my boring upper middle class.
It's usually how people
upbringing.
do it. It's usually how people do it. I think I got into it because I think the original reason I enjoyed it was the graphics, the designs and the graphics of everything were what caught my eye. I remember seeing my first Blind T-shirt with the little Grim Reaper on there, and I'm 29, so like Blind was like
That was it.
That was like the beginning of it. That was the beginning of it. Blind, Enjoy, all this stuff. Rodney Mullen, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Those were my reasons to, like, I was just so fascinated watching Tony Hawk on that little circle concrete pad, just doing all them, like, them flatland tricks, all them Caspers and all that shit. And it was incredible to me. And it's always interesting to hear how people get into it, especially someone, you said you're 48. You obviously still love it. I saw you were wearing some Vans whenever you walked in.
Well, I had to retire. I had to actually actively retire 3 years ago.
Okay.
Because so my surgery, I had the surgeries and all that.
Yeah.
And I have no ACL in my left knee. Like you don't
so
even
it's
need
just
one.
Shot.
Don't even need one actually.
Yeah.
They said as long as you keep your hams and your quads and all that strong, you don't need an ACL technically. Technically. And so I skated for another 10 years. That was my goal when I rehabbed and got back. That was like I want to get back on the board and got back on. Well, the problem was I did ask my orthopedic surgeon, hey, what's going to happen if I keep riding for another 10 years kind of hard? And well, I found out I woke up one morning to get out of bed, man, and my knee just like my good knee wouldn't work anymore. Like it just was like buckled. And so I literally
had two bum knees.
Well, I ended up getting compensatory, kind of just like damage. And so now I have like bone-on-bone arthritis in both knees. Ugh. So I'm getting like a double knee replacement, probably at about 55, I think my surgeon said he wants me to wait till.
All right.
So I had to retire because he's like, it's either retire or
it's still in the heart,
don't walk.
You could tell it's still in the heart.
Well, it's funny. It was the hardest thing to walk away from because it's the longest I've ever done anything. Like I've done it longer than I haven't.
Yeah.
And it was part of my music culture, a huge chunk of my friends.
Yeah.
And just a large part of my social scene because when I would get done with my crazy work, like funerals and doing all this forensic stuff, man, going out to skate for an hour or two was like, it was my favorite release, I think. And that's what always skateboarding was for me. It was like that great like release from society because it's like you, gravity, and concrete.
Yeah.
You versus that stuff.
Make it happen.
Oh, and it's just fun, man. It's very zen-like. I tried to surf when I was a kid and briefly on like when I'd be on summer vacations. And
I'm afraid of water. I can't go into it. I can't go into it.
As close as you can get. Snowboarding, your feet are attached. It's lame. I don't know. but like that freedom, and I think it is. And it's just like when I started really skating a lot out in Colorado too, because I always liked ramps. I was always like kind of like a vert guy. I skated everything back in the day, but I liked pools and big ramps. In Colorado, man, when I lived out there, they had 100 public skate parks in that state.
Really?
And that was when I moved in 2003. I know there's like more than that now because their lottery funding pays for public parks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then now with the marijuana legalization and the medical,
they donate so much shit.
So, dude, you should see like the park right down the street in Carnegie. Okay.
Yeah.
The parks they have in tiny little dirt towns make that look like a toy.
Wow.
Like it's astounding. And so I was riding these parks out there that were gigantic, and I started doing like big airs and like where you're up in the air and you have time to like hear your wheels spinning and things like that. And like
that's awesome.
It was wild. It was really fun, and it just kind of became that thing where that's if I wasn't working, like that's what I wanted to go out and do and stuff like that. So, you got together with your little crew and you always had a gang you rolled. It was so difficult to give up all that. And you couldn't like ease your way out.
That was one of the best things about it, though, was like the social aspect of it all, because those were your fucking dudes, and it was just you're out there together, even if you were behind a building, and you're all just sitting there, and it was just a good vibe. Like everything about it was a good vibe. You got music bumping, and it was just always. The majority of my childhood is I could just think of that. Surroundings, like all them surroundings and everything like that. My buddies always had mini ramps in their yards.
Oh yeah,
us building boxes and shit like that, and it was just always so fun. Do you ever keep up with anything like currently any of the people that are out now and everything?
It's funny. I did for a little while because it's funny. I still one of the guys. I don't know if you ever met Jake. They call him Chewy down at One Up. I've known him for years. Okay, I still hang out with things. We do music and stuff like that together. And but it's funny, like I hang out at One Up on Sundays once in a while when he works there.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because like I haven't watched videos for a while. Like I got Thrasher off my feed, you know what I mean? Because I was kind of sucked into it still. But I'm like, man, you have to be in or out. It's kind of weird. I was like, I realized I had to be in or out, and it got to the point that even within 6 months, I didn't know who anybody was anymore. Like those companies, you know how fast
just
companies
so many
turn
people,
over.
so many people nowadays, so many young kids that are just so fucking good, and it's hard to keep up with who's out now, who's doing really really great. And I mean, you turn on. The
only thing I was excited to hear was that Austin Camfouche finally went pro for Anti-Hero.
Anti-Hero. I got his board. I got both of them right in my. You got more than two, but
he was always a fun guy to skate with. And it's fun to see that he finally got out and got out there and made it.
I love what I love most about him is that he does not have a social media. I love that he has no social media presence. I respect that because I'm addicted to my fucking phone. It's attached to my hip.
Well, he was the nomad for a while when he was building the skate parks and stuff like that. He was like floating around and.
That's good though. I mean, like, why? I mean,
he was living the core, man. He was like living that core. That's how Anti-Hero is. It seems like, you know what I mean. Like, I think about it. Cardiel's one of my all-time favorites.
That's the bare bones.
And it's just funny, man. Those guys are just gnarly. You know what I mean? Like
gnarly dudes. That's it. Gnarly dudes.
There's nothing small. Like everything's like. That's why like he's perfect for that because that's how he always rode. You know what I mean? Like Austin's was just always like that, like fast, like blazing kind of stuff.
A lot of great people in Pittsburgh nowadays. It seems to be like a crazy resurgence of shit. You see some young people out there killing it. There's some dudes that One Up is always like they're part of their crew. Like they're just fucking animals. Kid named Tyler Hanna, you know who that is? JTH, he's on Instagram. But
I don't think so. Unless I've met him down there. Like I said, I've met a lot of kids down there.
I'm sure you met him, but One Up is always posting his videos. This fucking dude, you can't tell if he skates regular or switch.
Nice.
Like that's how fluid he is in switch. You're just like, damn, like that's crazy. But all right. So I mean, I think it's wild. So you get into. I'm not going to keep picking your brain about this because I want to hear more about what you do for a living. So you get through this schooling, and you said Pittsburgh has one of the best schools.
Well, it's odd. There's about 52 schools in the entire country. And there's only a handful that are what's considered to be called a flagship or a standalone school. Yeah. Where they are like essentially like a not-for-profit with a kind of board of directors and not attached to any other educational institution. Okay. So, for example, most of the schools in the country are attached to a community college somewhere. Okay.
Really?
The only other one in Pennsylvania is right outside of Philadelphia, and it's called Northampton. And they only have about 7 to 10 students in their program at any given time. And you get your preliminary education at the community college, then you kind of move into the funeral service part. Whereas our school, we've been open since we're celebrating our 80th anniversary. We just had our 80th anniversary celebration last weekend. Yeah, damn. 80 years. And so 1939, we're the third oldest in the country. Cincinnati is the oldest from, I think, 1897. And then
holy shit,
McAllister in New York is in between us. So pretty good tradition. We just started with a brand new era at the school where we have a new program director who essentially runs the school, a new dean, things like that. So it's kind of like the third era of the school. Okay. When the school originally started, it was over in Oakland. It's actually right near basically where Carlow University is. They built a new apartment building there where the original
What is the school called?
Was. The Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science.
Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science.
We call it PIMS for short, because that's a lot of words.
Yeah, that's all right, though.
The original school was the Pittsburgh School of Embalming the first year, I believe. And then it switched to PIMS. So, yeah, we've been around for 80 years. And
that's crazy to me. 80 years?
It's really interesting because there's schools that are dropping. Like every year, 1 or 2 schools close down across the country. And it's getting much more competitive because there's now an online aspect to our schooling. We actually have had an online program for 20 years. We were the very first in the country. Now everybody does it.
How do you take online courses and learn how to embalm a body?
You do everything but those lab classes online, and then you come and learn some with us and some at a funeral home wherever you live. So it's kind of hybridized in that sense. But yeah, you do all the hands-on stuff in our lab or in a funeral home. So it's interesting. It's for people that want to re-career usually. Yeah. And we have students in all 50 states that do it. It's fairly successful. So it's really wild having gone to school there about 10 years, 12 years ago. And then I've been teaching there now for 5, and it's amazing to see how much change has happened in the past 5 years.
Did you know you wanted to be a teacher at all?
Not really. It's odd. I liked what I did so much. Like I wanted to be the technical guy. I wanted to be the embalmer. That was my goal because my grandfather wasn't so, finely embalmed.
Yeah.
That was kind of my goal. Is I want to be the embalmer, and I want to learn all this cosmetics and things like this.
But the passion is what got you into to spreading your knowledge.
Well, then I guess that's the thing is that people, when you see somebody that, kind of has that strong drive, you want to nurture it. Well, then what happens is, you see the person that taught you and you're like, all right, well, now I'm going to do that for them. And there's always mentoring in our business. You actually are supposed to do a 1-year internship somewhere, which is supposed to be a guided mentorship to say, hey, here's how I do it here. Here's how I learned from my father or the person that trained me. And essentially they're saying, hey, someday you're going to probably take over this business. Here's why I'm showing you this. So it's like a sacred kind of training thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And a lot of people don't get a good experience doing it, but when instructors see that kind of drive in somebody, they're like, well, they might make a good instructor, things like that. So it's interesting. You kind of get tapped.
Yeah.
And I remember I was actually hanging out not too far from here at a friend's house one day after doing some skating. And I got a phone call from the president of the school at the time. And I was like, oh, why is he calling me?
Is this bad?
Well, I seriously thought like there was something wrong with my transcripts. I didn't graduate. They found something was wrong. I was nervous. And I'm like, why is he calling me? And literally was like, hey, we just wanted to talk to you about, an opportunity if you could come, talk to us. And turns out this guy that had been teaching at the school for 30-something years, and prior to that, I taught at the Cincinnati location for 20 years, was retiring. And it was the dream job. It was the restorative artist instructor position and teaching anatomy and environmental science. And those are that's what my undergrad degree is in. So I was like, wow, this is awesome. So, and to get called back and kind of tapped at your alma mater is that's such an honor.
That's a dream.
It was really great. And at the time, there was 2 other people that had just been recently graduated. We were kind of the new kids, the golden kids. And we got kind of pulled in by the one instructor, and he's now the new program director. It's a really good time to have come up under his tutelage and his mentorship. So it's very exciting now to see how much things have changed. We are completely restructuring that restorative art program I talked about to where we're now taking it to a new level. Like no one else in the country has anything like it.
Really?
So it's going to be very, very exciting to see it kind of come to fruition. So
kind of be there from the ground up,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got to design some of the components that are being used in it based on our real world experience.
Wow.
So that's something that is pretty new to the program that, it's interesting. We've always done what was kind of done in the industry as a standard.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of setting that standard. So it's exciting. And I think about I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not gotten both of those career trainings. So it's funny that skateboarding accident aligned me just perfectly. If I would have gone in when I wouldn't have met that instructor, wouldn't have got that opportunity. So it's kind of funny. Yeah. Everything happened for just absolute right reason.
So that sounds crazy. Definitely crazy. So whenever you got involved in this, what was your goal whenever you first started to go to school? What did you want to do in a perfect world?
Well, that was the thing was when you go to school, you're either going to be the person who does the embalming and works in the back in the lab capacity, or you're going to work up front dealing with the families. And there's you can find that median, and some people do. They find both of those prongs, and they tend to do really well.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to work in the back. I wanted to be the embalmer, do the restorations. And of course, once I started doing the autopsies, I was like, this is amazing. I love surgical dissection. I don't know what it is. And I got pretty decent at it.
Yeah.
But it was just fundamentally interesting to learn how the body worked and it doesn't, things like that. So I was like, I really want to do this technical stuff. Well, I had people that constantly kept trying to drag me up front. They always wanted me to come up and talk to people, and living people scare me. So like I think that's where I come from. Like they have problems. They're upset. Their loved one died.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Plus
Emotions involved, everything like that.
And whatever else they had going on in their life, they're bringing it in with them on top of that grief reaction.
Yeah.
So that's like some of the most bizarre interactions you can have with somebody is in one of those scenarios. And if you are not comfortable at it or good at it, it shows real hard. You know what I mean? Like, it shows real strong.
Absolutely, it has to.
I had some uncomfortable moments dealing with people, but I always had people like that kind of would drag me out and make me come up and do things. And it's what I realize is there's a lot of lack of self-care in our industry because we're so concerned with taking care of everybody else. We tend to not take care of ourselves very often.
Yeah.
And there's good people in the industry that will see that and make sure that you are emotionally healthy and physically healthy. But I worked with this kind of earth hippie mother funeral director that everyone knows one of these people. They're awesome. They're good to have around. Lots of hugs and stuff like that. But one time we had this case where there was this young girl that basically kind of looked like what my wife would have looked like at her age. She died of like measles and stuff like that. Which is really weird in this day and age.
Wow.
It's a couple of years ago when one of these outbreaks happened, and just happened to basically resemble my wife and like my niece that looks very similar to my wife. And so it was kind of strange. It was a little emotional, things like that, but got it all taken care of and all this. But the family came, and they had kind of a private viewing usually before anybody else comes. And the funeral director, she came in and she's like, "Hey, you got to come up here, and the family wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh man, what are you doing?" Like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm like, I'm in my scrubs and all this.
Yeah.
And that was my excuse. I can't go upstairs. I'm in my scrubs. And she's like, nope, you're coming upstairs with me. Takes me up, and it was like the mom, the dad, and all these people were there. And the this girl was like, she was about 6 years old. That's what it was. And then the little sister comes up to me and says, "My sister looks so beautiful. She's like sleeping like an angel." Like, she didn't know that I had anything to do with it, but she knew I was from the funeral home.
Yeah.
And it was weird. It was so emotional. But she was like having me meet the family. She's like, "This is who took care of her." Like, I usually never get that kind of experience, but they were hugging me and stuff. It was weird. Like, it was so wild. But I was like, wow. I was upset at the moment when it happened, but afterwards I was like, that was like tremendous.
I remember asking Sarah that. I was like, do you ever, because I remember us talking about like if it was a child or like, you know, a loved one like that. I was like, do you ever get like emotional in that way? And she was like, not really, because I'm helping them. And I'm doing this because I want to do it good for people, and I want people to have the best experience they can in that dark of time. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, I never thought about that until she told me that. But I mean, like, that does make sense. So they had a good reaction to what you did.
Oh yeah. Well, and the wild thing is, we tell people in the school that you're going to come into a situation someday. It's going to happen to everybody. No matter how much you think you can hide from it, it'll happen someday, where someone's going to come at you to hug you. And that's when you find out, man, if you're a hugger or a runner.
Yeah.
And if you're a runner, you might not do well in the front of the house. You know what I mean? Because that's blunt. Like that's a very, like, rejecting that from somebody.
Yeah, that's
so. But it's wild. You never know till it happens. And people say, "Oh, I don't hug." And I said, "Oh man, you might change your mind when it happens." I said, because now, man, I'm just like this magnet for it. I don't look for it, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, but it's wild too when, especially if you work in a place where you know your community, people come up to you in the freaking grocery store like a year later and be like, "Man, thanks so much for what you did for my dad and all this," and like hug you and thank you. And it's wild because, like, man, what other job do you get that? Like, where people like pay you well and then come and thank you like that, like in an emotional level. So and I think people need it more. I think more funeral directors need to get that thank you kind of thing and a little bit of that raw emotion, because we shield ourselves from it. And the old stoic way is don't cry, don't show emotions and all that.
Yeah.
Oh, man, if people need it, you give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing. And
I feel like you would have to.
And you can't go over the top and, like, be screaming and crying and, like, exaggerated. But it's wild. You have to show that you're human, or I wouldn't trust somebody. You know what I mean? I wouldn't trust somebody in that capacity if I didn't think that
they had some sort of emotion that was caring. Yeah, perfectly caring. Yeah. Now, in the beginning, whenever you started this, like, did you have any sort of, like, hesitation about working with, dead bodies of people?
So
Did that ever creep you out?
well, no, and it's odd because that's, like I said, we mentioned earlier that when you go into the lab for the very first time for an observation, you have no idea what you're going in for.
Yeah.
You have no idea who's on the table,
Yeah.
what the circumstance was, and that's part of our game is you never get to choose who's there that day. That's why the students will always ask, "Oh, what case do we have to work on today?" And it's like, "Well, it's a deceased human being."
Yeah.
And that's all you need to know until you walk into that room. I said, because it doesn't matter, because if you're going to walk out, you're done.
Yeah.
Like, if you do that on the job, you're just done.
Are there people that do that though?
Yeah. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in a student capacity. It was more so the forensic side of things, the death investigation part. It can suck the life out of you, literally. It really can. It can be really depressing. And if you have an emotional connection to something going on in your life and that ends up on your table there in front of you,
Yeah.
we had cases where just it looked like their friend that had just died. Babies, children. Oh man, that just can wreck you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if
It
you're
has to.
trying to have a kid. We had a woman who, she was having problems having a kid, and then we had this murdered baby that was murdered by her parents, and she just broke. She left the program.
Yeah, I would think that would be a thing. Like, some people might think that this would be for them, and then
It is.
once they get to that point, it could kind of break
you
them.
don't know. You don't know till you go in there. So it was interesting. Now, I've actually had a lot of death around me in my life
Yeah.
from a young age. It's interesting. I think going back, literally, I've had teachers, friends. I remember we were just looking this case up. This happened when I was in middle school. One of my classmates fell into a farm thresher, like a big mower and stuff like that. And it's wild because my bosses that I worked for, Dr. Wecht and his assistant, did his autopsy. They remembered that case from 1984. Remembered that case because it was so gruesome. But I remember when that case happened, I was discussing this at work recently, that was the first case where I was like, it was the first closed casket I ever saw in my life.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been to a closed casket.
And I was like, it was probably about 11 or 12, and I was just like, what happened to him? What's he look like? What happened? What's he look like in there now?
Yeah.
And it wasn't a morbid thing, but I was just like, what's
More of just curiosity.
He's gone. Where does it, So, and I kept going, and in my family, we had a lot of closed caskets. And that starts to really mess with you because you're just like, are they really in there?
Yeah.
Did they really die?
Yeah.
I want to see him. I want to touch him.
Yeah.
I want to know. So it was odd. So I kind of had this thing where I was freaked out by funerals, and then sometimes where I was like, it felt good to go to them and see the person there, things like that.
Some
and
closure.
Get that closure. And so it was odd the first time going in to the lab, and I'm like, wow, I don't know these people. Chances are I'm not going to know this person.
Yeah.
If I do, they're not close to me because I would have known they died.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you go in and you look at it from a technical perspective almost. And you have to look at it that way. This is work. This is a lab. And I'm in here to help this person, whether it was the crime investigation, the death investigation, or the embalming. So I'm here to help this person transition to the next place they need to be.
Yeah.
And we're caretakers. And that's the thing is, so you have to take that, even some of the brutal things we have to do in a physical capacity, sometimes more so on the autopsy side.
Yeah.
But even in embalming sometimes, there's some things that are, when we train students, it's just like, I know this seems really odd and it seems really bizarre, but we have to do this. And you just have to think of it as technical work and you're helping the people. But it is hard to work around sometimes, some of the things we do. Especially, when we were doing, I was doing neurological research for a couple of years. We would do ALS, Alzheimer's, dementia,
yeah.
you name it. We were doing that kind of stuff. We were doing it for the government, for VA, and literally we were taking out people's brains and spines.
Yeah.
And that is a brutal operation. There's no nice way to do it. But it was really interesting because it's wild. That kind of work really helps people because people got, exposed to things they weren't supposed to have exposure to, things like that. Or there was a lot of people that were having genetic testing done. They were like, we don't want to expose our children to these horrible neurological disorders.
Yeah.
And a lot of those run in families. So it was really interesting working in that kind of stuff. That was almost like, And I think about even the crime investigation was as close as I could get to public service, I guess. I was never in the military or law enforcement. I was like too much of a coward to do any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too.
But I think about like it was very interesting actually kind of being like a community service as much as I could, especially working on all those crime investigations, things like that, kind of getting people justice, getting people answers.
So how far, like how soon from after you started school to you getting into that path of being like a crime investigator?
I actually, it was within 2 years. I literally did a 2 year, almost like a year and a half to 2 year internship.
Yeah.
So
and that was all just a regular embalming funeral.
That was outside of work. Yeah. So I was going to school during the day. I would go to school all day, and then whenever I was not in school, I was in the autopsy lab, volunteering time and just like doing an internship there.
Yeah.
So literally from the first day I observed a case in the lab, I was actually getting to embalm. Because the people that were working were like, hey, man, you seem to know what you're doing. Come on in. So both my experiences of observations, I was like right into it. So I was like, I had no apprehension and no fear. As soon as I was in there, I was like, there's that body. Let's do it. And that was it. I was over it.
Yeah.
And same thing with the autopsy. So once I got into the technical stuff, I was like, I am going to do this nonstop every minute I can.
To the best of your ability.
Literally, the only time I skipped class in mortuary school was to go do autopsies. Like, I was like the biggest dork ever, but it paid off, and I was able to do that because my wife was working full time, was able to like allow me to go to school and volunteer in this.
Yeah,
and then I started working in a funeral home too, so I was just
all in it,
nonstop, and I got so much experience under me that I was just like, wow, like. I got to that point where I was like, man, I haven't hit like this. I haven't gotten freaked out by anything yet. I haven't gotten scared by anything yet. Like, it still hasn't happened. Like, it's odd. Like, it's just weird. When I go in there, I'm like, I'm so excited to work. I'm so excited to be in that lab. But yeah, it's weird. I've never had anything freak me out. I end up having this thing now where I actually specialize in taking care of children and babies.
Really?
Because that's something that a lot of people cannot handle.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can't
like
deal with that.
Veterans, like guys that have been in the business forever, can't handle it. Because if you have kids, you tend to see your kid there on that table.
Yeah. Do you have kids?
Nope.
Okay.
And I think that's the key. I think it really is. You know what I mean? I think it really is. Because I remember when I was in school, I saw a guy come in that was we were in our lab. And this funeral director comes in, and they had this little box with him, and we knew what that meant. And he came in and he set it down, and he told the instructor, he's like, I can't do this. I can't handle this. And like left. And I was like, kind of freaked out. I'm like, that guy's been a funeral director for like 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And he can't handle this. And it was weird. I was like, okay, like, here you go. Here's the test. Like, this is a test of your resolve.
Can you handle this?
Can we do this? And my partner that I was embalming with, man, we took care of that little baby, and I was like, wow, there you go. I can do that. I can do that. And then, of course, when you're working in the forensic side, we worked on a lot of kids.
That's fascinating to me as far as like the forensics end of it is. I mean, like help solving problems, help solving these cases and shit like that. I think that would be, I feel like I would have more of, I don't know anything, obviously, because I haven't had it in front of me, but I feel like that I would have more of your thought process of it, almost as like being helpful, like trying to do something positive to offer your service in this situation right here.
Well, I've always been a problem solver. Like, I love puzzles. I always love taking things apart. Like, I mean, It sounds weird.
Reverse engineering type shit.
But it is. Like, I would just take apart the radio or take apart things, and I wasn't always so good at putting them back together. But it's wild. Like, and so that's the thing. I think I was able to take my drive for liking to fix and solve things. And I have like OCD and ADHD, and from back in the 70s when they didn't know what it was, so it was never really treated well.
Yeah.
But that was something I could focus in on. It was like Ritalin for me. You know what I mean? It was like scientific Ritalin. I could be like, here's the puzzle I need to solve today. Yeah. And I have 2 hours to get this done, and it really is important. So I think that became kind of the thing where when I would go into that lab, I would go into this mode. Same thing when I'm embalming. Because every embalming is its own puzzle to solve. You look at what did they have as a disease process? How did they die? How can I choose my chemicals that I'm going to use? And make this all work at the end. Yeah. So it is, and you have this limited amount of time to get it done. They're going to be laid out in X amount of days. So it is. It's this race against time and against the chemistry and the pathology. So I think that's what benefits people is if you like solving problems and thinking about things critically.
Yeah.
Man, that's how it works, because I'll get into this mode where I'll go in the lab, and I've been in there where we've basically worked on 6 cases in a row. And that's intense, like using your mind and your hands and things like that, the physicality of it. And I get into this mode where I don't have to eat or drink or go to the bathroom or anything for like
autopilot.
6, 7, 8 hours at a time. It's not healthy. It's not healthy because when I crash, when I come out of it, it's like a trance. Oh my God. I have to get home within an hour and eat something and drink, because like I've lost 6-7 pounds a day and things like that doing that.
Wow.
And then I'm emotionally drained and physically drained, and I have to sleep until like noon the next day. So
do you tend to notice that you have any emotional weight on you ever? Or are you able to like disconnect
Well,
that?
you know what? It was much stronger and harder in the forensic aspect, which being 3 years out of it now, I still have triggers once in a while because my cases are still in the news.
Yeah.
They pop up. There'll be anniversaries that pop up. And the very last homicide case I worked, it just won't go away. Like it keeps coming back, like because it was this kid. You know what I mean? It was an accidental shooting and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, it happened to be the son of somebody that we had worked with in the business for like 5 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I heard him talk about him all the time. And he's in one of my slideshows and things that I use for teaching. So every time I come up on that one slide, I just kind of shudder a little. So it's odd. There are triggers. There are certain, I don't know how well you follow the news, but there was a case called the Greensburg Six, which happened a number of years ago, where 6 people raped, tortured, and murdered this mentally handicapped woman.
I do
in
remember
Greensburg.
that. I do remember that.
I worked that case.
Really?
And that is something that will never leave me, like in so many different ways.
Yeah, I remember that now that you say that. That's
Brutal.
fucked up.
It's one of the most heinous things I've ever seen in my life, and you can't unsee it. You can't unlearn it.
What happened to them 6?
Well,
Jail?
Death row and life, most of them.
Okay, yeah.
Those are the very first people I actually helped put on death row was from that trial.
Now, with cases like that where your problem solving leads to people being on death row and life in prison and shit like that, does that, I mean, I'm trying to, tiptoe around this, but I feel like I have to be blunt. Do you get satisfaction whenever you could get to that solution?
It's weird because a lot of people, it's funny too, because like politics come up a lot in everything I do in different ways. Like,
yeah.
And political, I mean, when I mean that, I mean like Republican, Democrat stuff, but also just there's a lot of politics in investigations and things like that. And it's wild because I tell people my politics have changed a lot because of my work in this. And a lot of people, like most funeral directors, are, kind of like dyed-in-the-wool Republicans and things like that.
Yeah.
And you follow the party lines and all this. Well, I'm so many different directions coming into this, but it's funny, like my views on the death penalty, things like that, have been strongly solidified by my work in this. And I don't know if it's satisfaction.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bad word.
No, I know what you mean. I feel good that I helped this family get justice because most people want that type of justice, like that retribution. But what's weird is when you see the crimes that are perpetrated on these people, there is no rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Like that's what, and I'm like, I don't care if you're for or against the death penalty, and we don't even utilize it here pretty much under our current administration.
Yeah.
But when you see what happened in that Greensburg case, man, there's no coming back.
And I think
can't
it's
fix that.
I think people that don't have that think opposite of like that believe the death penalty shouldn't be there. I mean, no one has experienced things that
it could change your mind about.
That could change your mind. You know what I mean? It's like you've seen like true, evil shit like that.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. I've seen the outcome of that. That's exactly it. And it's frightening to think about, in a moment in your life where you had like a rage moment or you were in a fight or something like that. You know what I mean? And to think, oh, wow, I could have lost control and hurt somebody. But it's like you see the outcome of these kind of things.
Yeah, what that really means.
And you're like, wow. And once again, it's like, what happened to you that you did this? Like, where did you come from? Which becomes a rabbit hole that I follow all too often. I go back into my cases.
Yeah.
And I go back into these people's backgrounds. I've resisted. I've never gone to a trial I've been involved in, but I've always wanted to go to one of the trials and just go in there and like look at them and you know what I mean? But I'm like, ooh, I don't want to. I don't want to be near those people.
Now, those the people that committed that crime, weren't they younger?
They ranged in age from 17 to 32.
Oh, okay.
Different races, different ages, everything.
Yeah.
That's what made that case so bizarre, was 6 people involved in that over a 3-day period where one of them wasn't just like, hey, this is the most insane thing ever. We need to stop this.
Yeah.
And stopped it. Like, it's the mob mentality. I have a minor in psychology. I've taught psychology for years, and I bring that case up a lot. I actually stopped using it because it was
too heavy.
It was too heavy for me to go through twice a year. Because people still ask me about it. I'm like, I don't really talk about it anymore. People have asked me to lecture about it. And I'm like, I can't.
And I feel like you having that experience in it. And I'm sorry for even asking, for bringing it up, but I mean, I'm sure that shit just, you see it in your head, and it just, I mean, like, I feel like that can't leave you.
It's weird, and it happened. So if you remember the case, it happened in was it January? No, February. It was a blizzard in February, and they stuffed her into a garbage can.
I do remember that. Yeah,
I can't ever have one of those 50-gallon tough like wear garbage cans. You know what I mean? Like, I can't. I have to have like the big green and yellow ones or whatever. They had her wrapped up and bound in tinsel and Christmas lights. Like, wow. I can't look at a blue Christmas light. Like, it freaks me out. Like, I can't have tinsel on my Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Like, it does. And then, so it is. There's weird things about that. But that case gets brought up. Oh my God, dude, those people come up for like parole and hearings and all this. And so it's constant. It's every time it comes up in the news, and someone like, oh, hey, did you hear that, Ricky Smyrns is on trial again? And I'm like, yes, I know. So, but it's wild because people know I worked on it. Yeah. So it's this thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it keeps popping up. Almost you can't get away from it.
And I used to, and it's wild because I think about like, I'm proud of the work I did on it. And I don't know if there's ever justice for it and things like that, but it's interesting. Like I said, it's almost like as much of a public service as I can do is helping to kind of work on those cases.
Absolutely.
And the odd thing is, it's like, man, not everybody can do this kind of work too. So if you can do it, you should do it as long as you can, and help your community as much as you can.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, when did you mentioned the reconstructive aspect of it all, and that's fascinating to me because I've been to funerals where I've been to wakes where people have committed suicide and a gunshot to the head, and it's been an open casket, and I remember walking in there and thinking about is this going to be an open casket? Mm-hmm. Because I knew what happened.
You think about that the whole way to the funeral?
The whole way, and I'm just like, fuck. And I've a very, very close friend who's never been to a funeral, never seen a dead body. Wow. And he's 29 years old, and it's just he has a smaller family, but it's interesting to me because whether you want to or not, like that's what was in my mind. It's like what's gonna happen there? And I remember going up to that casket and saying my piece to it and looking at him and seeing the work, and you would never be able to tell.
Yep.
Another person that I knew passed away by something flipped on top of him and crushed like his jaw, and supposedly it was bad, but like the way that you guys could perform and reconstruct this into a way that gives people an ability to be able to have that closure with an open casket, to be able to see a family be able to mourn the death of their kid or something like that. I feel like that there would be a piece missing if there was a closed casket. You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting when you talk to people that have had that kind of experience where they weren't able to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And it was a decision made by somebody else, you know what I mean, that was arranging the funerals and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's terrible because they say, like, I've never really gotten over that. I wish I could have said goodbye, things like that. And it's interesting too when you hear especially things about like people that have like taken their own lives. Imagine the family member that finds them.
Oh,
Someone's going to
absolutely.
find them.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're going to have in your head is
Yeah.
what you found there. And that is horrifying. So those are some of the hardest cases we work on because like we know the story. We know that mom found him or the brother or something.
Yeah.
And that they want to see them another time. And we have to do something better. And those are the cases I think you work on the most. Sometimes, and not that anybody ever deserves more work.
Yeah.
But those kind of reconstruction cases, I end up giving away that work sometimes. Like I'm supposed to charge $100 an hour is what's on my price list.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't think I've ever even charged that. Like you end up giving it away sometimes because you find out the circumstances of things.
Now, how do you guys even come up with a protocol to do that? I mean, someone had to do that in the beginning.
Yeah. It's really hard, and it's something that when you try to ask people in the industry, there's not a lot of solid answers.
Yeah.
It's kind of make it up as you go.
Yeah.
Because it's such a specialized thing. It used to be more common, and it's becoming a rarer art form now in the business. And I tell my students, you're the generation that could either bring it back or could kill it. So, this is your time, guys, to let this, to make this shine and keep it alive.
Whenever you say it's rare, do you mean that in the fact that, people don't do the reconstruction and they just go to a closed casket?
Yes,
maybe?
yes. Because not many people are good at it because it takes an art and a science component that kind of meet right in the middle, which for me was perfect. I've always had both of those things. I never knew what to do with them.
Now, did you ever have any experience in I know this is a gross comparison, but any sort of like doing Halloween makeup whenever you were younger?
I did actually. I was into special effects makeup when I was a kid.
Because I feel like that would be almost, my brother has always been someone who's done zombie makeup, latex and everything like that. And I feel like that would be the closest comparison that I could think of is that would be a good start to
it
what
is,
this was.
because you have to learn anatomy. Okay,
Yeah.
You've got to learn anatomy. Now, what they're doing is abnormal anatomy because it's not real in the sense there's aren't zombies. Okay?
Yeah.
But I had a buddy that from skateboarding that I knew for years that was a top graduate out of the Savini School. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And he works in the industry now. He's still, every once in a while I get an email from him and be like, hey, I'm working on this movie. And he's like, I have this, severed arm. How's my muscular structure look around the bone and things like
really?
that. And he's asked me for, I should
that's so
charge
awesome.
him. But
That's so
literally, I
awesome.
would do, almost consultation work. So there is a crossover. It's just they're making what we're trying to fix.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
So there is a crossover. We do get people that come from those schools sometimes and give it a shot. You've got to learn a fundamentally different component because now you're going in the opposite direction of you want healthy, not horror. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is a very similar thing. You learn to mold and cast and things like that. But we actually use plastic surgery techniques. So we're literally using and it's straight up post-mortem plastic surgery where we are using internal sutures like they use for plastic surgery reconstructions, things like that.
Okay.
We actually have things that are basically injectable fillers that aren't necessarily like Botox, but that will interact with dead skin and dead tissues where we can inject it in and mold it and sculpt. So if someone is missing usually if the temple muscles get diminished when you have cancer and things like that, we can fill those back up and make them look healthy again.
Wow.
If your lips are small and dehydrated, we fill those up. So there's all these little chemical things. So it's plastic surgery without having to worry about infection, pain, or healing. So it's amazing what we can do.
Yeah.
And there are high level versions. So like I said, it is a little more rare. It used to be more commonplace. People used to do it more.
Yeah.
So now that people don't do it so much anymore, people don't ask for it. It's a supply and demand.
Now, is there any times where you have been asked to, reconstruct someone where you weren't able to?
Couple times, handful of times I've actually had to close a casket.
Okay.
And that is one of the hardest parts of this job when you specialize in this is being able to realize you can't do it. Stepping aside from your ego and being okay, I did everything I could. Here's the best I can. And you offer that to the family and they tell you. You don't decide. The family tells you. You know what I mean? And that's the thing is, man, stepping aside from that ego and being able to like make it for the family is poof, man. That's the hardest thing there is to do.
I bet it is, because like you might now. Have you ever had an experience where you've done this and you finish your work and their loved one or whatever said that like, no, this can't be, like, this doesn't look like them?
Oh yes.
Okay.
It is actually more common than you would expect.
Okay.
And what it is, and what I've realized is, and I go straight to my psychology, because you find these kind of things out when you make the family arrangement. This is why it is good to go up front and meet with families. Okay, when you make if you make just the family arrangement, okay, that is where the tells come out, and you're going to kind of figure out where you're going to be at working with this family for the next 3 to 5 to 7 days, depending on what the arrangements are.
Yeah.
So if things start getting weird in the arrangement conference, things will get weird at the funeral and so on. So if somebody shows up and they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that's going to be their modus operandi for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
It could get worse as it goes on.
I didn't even think about that.
Oh, yeah. Someone
People
comes in.
self-medicating because of the...
And even worse.
Yeah.
Right. And if they have a problem already,
you
get people that have mental illness issues. It's exacerbated by the grief reaction, and then they self-medicate.
Wow.
So you get a 3-pronged thing going on. So you end up being a very, very strong observer. And that's one thing that comes from both fields, from the forensics and from funeral service. You are a people watcher. You are an observer.
Yeah.
And from the minute those people walk in your door, they are a liability till the time they leave. So you have to. So it's funny. I tell the students, when you are a trainee or an intern, you will be stuck at the door, opening the door and saying, "And into the right, Mr. Drobish is in here." You know what I mean? And to the left, Mrs. Smith over there.
Yeah.
And you will be then looking them up and down. And be looking at their eyes. Are they pinned? Are they bloodshot? Are they saucered? Okay.
Yeah.
What are they on? Are they on anything? Are they upset? You start looking at those things. You start looking. Are they darting in and out of the bathroom constantly? Are they going out the back door into the alley? They come back in smelling like cigarettes, marijuana, whatever. Are they disappearing into the bathroom for long periods of time and not coming out? Like, did they overdose in the bathroom?
Yeah.
There's all these wild components. So you end up being like this people watcher and at times a polite bouncer, which is an odd gig.
Yeah,
Very odd gig.
I didn't even think about that. I bet some shit happens during that where
Fist fights in front of the casket.
Oh, wow.
So it's very interesting that you have to be so cognitive of what's going on around you all the time. Like you can't take your eyes off people.
Yeah.
And then especially like you have people up in the casket where you just did all that amazing restorative work. And say, for example, when you go there, they died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound or the car flipped over on them. So you get the looky-loos. You get the people coming up there. They're touching their face.
Really?
Or lifting things up. Are their feet still attached? And so you end up having to have somebody stand up in front of the casket and guard the body.
That is insane.
It's the Wild West, and you can't ever expect that anything's going to go the way you think it will.
I guess all the rules go out the window whenever people's emotions get involved.
And so psychology isn't such an important component, and you have to pay attention all the time. And this leads to where you're driving your procession, you're driving to church. You never know what's going to happen, and people don't respect funerals like they used to. People cut into the processions. People will cut you off. Things like that.
my wife's grandfather just passed away recently, and we were in a funeral, and these fucking people, like some young kids, just like gun through the procession, and I was so fucking mad that I seriously wanted to just like run them down. But that's true though. And people just didn't care.
Yep.
It's like, and then there was another guy who was like a landscaping business. He was like trying to cut in, and then I saw someone someone in the procession like went in front of them and just stopped. So like no one could get through, but it was mind blowing to me because like I myself, like I would never do that. Like funeral happens, stop, let it all go through, and have respect for it.
Funeral etiquette is starting to like lack, and it's interesting.
Etiquette in general is starting to lack.
Yeah, in general. I mean, and it's funny too because I think about this when I was still actively working as a funeral director a lot. Is when the Catholic Church was really starting to decline around here.
Yeah.
And funeral service and Catholicism are intricately tied. Like, I mean, I worked at an Italian Catholic. I worked at St. Mary's up on Mount Washington as our primary church. And we lost St. Justin's, which was the Irish one on the backside. And when you start to lose your churches and your schools, you can pretty much tell your business is going to disappear. Like it happens like exponentially. You watch the neighborhood, it happens in these little like spurts. And so it's interesting to see how traditional funeral service has tremendously changed in the past 10 years in Pittsburgh, and is going to continue to change as the baby boomers really start to go. When the baby boomers start to die, that's a majority of the funeral directors are in that age range.
Huh.
So now all the young kids that are in school right now are going to be kind of the up and comers in like 10 years, and it'll be a whole different business. It'll be very interesting to see how Pittsburgh adjusts to it.
Really?
Yeah, because we've always been ethnically and kind of religiously based in funeral service. If you're Polish, you live in Polish Hill, and you know what I mean? You go to that. You go to
you have your areas.
Exactly. And those are kind of a dying concept, no pun intended, in Pittsburgh. You don't really necessarily live in the neighborhood you grew up in, and those, the Polish Falcons, those clubs aren't around anymore and things like that. So a lot of those ties, the American Legions, you try to find a place that'll get you a veteran service now where you can get a bugle played and taps.
That's a good point.
The veterans are all dying.
Yeah, there was people at my wife's grandfather's though, which was I didn't know he was in the service, but they did have people there with. I think he even had they had a couple people with rifles there to do a salute for him.
Here's the wild thing: they might not have been local. We have had to call people in from Maryland and other states to bring in honor guards to do services because
holy shit.
I remember when I was still working up there on Mount Washington, there was the VFW there. The guys were dying like every year, 2 or 3 of them would go. And I remember they lost the chaplain. They lost the only other guys left after the World War II and Korea guys.
Yeah.
There was like 1 or 2 from Vietnam. There was 1 guy my age from Desert Storm era, and that's it. And there's no one left in there.
Wow.
Like, it's just going to be gone. That post will be gone. And there's no one that plays the trumpet or the bugle anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
I was playing them at services.
Really?
Okay, I played trumpet when I was a kid. I don't know how to play trumpet. It's automated now. You just get this little, and it taps as a button you push and pretend to play it.
Oh my God.
That's how sad it's getting
crazy
with veteran services now because the VFWs, people don't join it now.
Wow.
And there's no one to do these honor guard services as the last of them are going. So it's interesting to see how it's changing, and it's not just funeral homes. It's the church.
Yeah.
It's the school. It's the VFW. The flower shops are now closing because people don't buy funeral flowers.
Yeah.
Every funeral's in lieu of flowers, make a donation, or it's GoFundMe and things like that. So
shout out Cyril's Flower Shop on the corner of the 11th block of East Carson Street. If people are looking for flowers, that's your dude.
But seriously, flower shops that have been open forever are going.
It's wild.
So it's interesting. And you see these kind of things radiate out. You know what I mean? So then the restaurants that would do all the repast meals, how much business did you just lose because the funeral home's not doing so well and the church is gone now?
Yeah. Now
it just trickles down.
With all this stuff, so you're doing all this stuff with the funerals and working as a funeral director and stuff like that. Did you favor working the autopsy end of it more because there's not as much? What do you want to call it?
I liked it because I was in a lab all day.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Lab all day doing my lab technical
stuff. It's disconnected from all that emotional type shit.
But it was bad because it was isolating me because of being away from all that and then the heavy factor of what I was dealing with there. So I could only go home and talk to my wife about so much because I didn't want to put my nightmares. Well, not that I have nightmares. I've never had bad dreams about what I do.
Yeah.
But the bad stuff I saw, I don't want to put in anybody else's head.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
As much as that's understandable.
Thought they wanted to hear about it. I'm like, you don't. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But you don't want it. You don't want it in there. So I never tried to put it in other people. And I could come home and tell her a certain amount of things. And she would know if I was out of sorts.
Yeah.
She could tell if I was out of sorts.
If you had a rough day.
She could just see in my eyes. I'd have this glaze or whatever, things like that. So she would ask me, and she would know when to stop asking or things like that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You have to have an outlet and a resource to talk to somebody and to kind of vent a little. Rather
than to just keep it all pent up inside you.
Oh, man.
Probably
and I've
eats
seen
away
people
at you.
do that, and they drink themselves to death. They end up shooting themselves.
Yeah.
depression, isolation. So it's the self-care thing is so strong now, and it's something where if you see somebody going south, it's your duty to kind of pull them back in a little bit. Like, look, man, I've been there. I've burned out. Everybody I know in this field that's real has admitted they've burned out at some point or another.
Yeah.
People that say, oh, nope, I'm strong, I'm tough, I'm okay. They've burned and they won't admit it. And that means it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it's very important to really promote the self-care thing where we're making sure we're taking care of ourselves and each other. And I think that was the thing when I was working in the autopsy stuff. I didn't know anybody else that was doing it other than the students I was training.
Yeah.
So we would get together and chat about stuff after cases, things like that. But after a while, I was like, man, I can't talk to anybody about this crazy crap.
So what do you do to kind of, get away from it and decompress and vent a little bit?
Well, it's weird. For a while, what I would do is I said we usually try to get together with students and talk with them about it. But after a while, it was weird. I had one or two friends that actually were bartenders that I would hang out and talk with. And they became my de facto almost psychiatrist kind of thing. And almost my barometer for maintaining my humanity, things like that. Because, once in a while you come across something and I'm like, I don't know how I'm reacting. This is just normal. Or
you might be
that.
desensitized from all this shit.
And that can definitely happen. And I think, you try to protect yourself and make sure that, I'm staying tough and all this. But, yeah, it's wild. And after a while, I started seeing kind of patterns where after a while I would have these kind of cases come up, and I would realize that I would isolate myself from people for a couple of days after that, things like that. I'm like, ugh, that's not healthy. Yeah. So I tried to talk about it as much as I could with people. And I said after a while, after I stepped away from it, I realized wow, that's tough. I don't know how long I could have done it,
super
I guess.
Heavy. Years and years of doing that. I mean, that's just cases and stories.
1,300 autopsies, you know what I mean? And you think about that, and it's I saw a lot of stuff.
That's how many you did? 1,300? Yeah. Jesus. Now, could I ask you, you don't have to get in any details of anything, but could I ask you the process of an autopsy? I know that there's different categories. I know that people could hire for private autopsies and, and I know there's probably, autopsies that are delegated down from, police and shit like that. Yep. Now, what's your process of it? From a beginning to end? Okay.
Literally in a legal capacity, autopsy is going to be done on somebody who dies under any suspicious capacity, foul play, anybody anybody involved in any type of surgery. Yeah. Anybody that dies in a correctional institution technically should have them done.
Technically,
not always. But basically, it's any time that or if somebody has, if they die unexpectedly at a young age and they weren't being diagnosed or treated for any type of disease, things like that. Yeah. So, and how it works is depending on where you live. So in Allegheny County, we have a medical examiner. Mm-hmm. Medical examiner is an appointed position. So it is literally appointed by the Allegheny County executive director, which is Rich Fitzgerald right now. Okay. He determines who the medical examiner is. Okay. And they appoint the position for a set period of time, and basically they get reappointed, things like that. Yeah. So Carl Williams is the current medical examiner. He gets appointed as often as needs be, and until somebody comes in else, he's there. So that's how it works with the medical examiner system. And you have to be a board-certified forensic pathologist. And there's only 110, 115 of those in the country. Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh, I think, has about 5 or 6. We are quite saturated. Really? Yes. I worked for 3 different ones in my tenure there at his office. So basically, if you're not in a medical examiner's office, when you got to more rural areas, which is where we worked our capacity, you work for a coroner's office. Now, coroner is an elected position. Anybody over the age of 18 can be a coroner. You just have to get elected.
What exactly is a coroner?
You basically just sign paperwork related to death investigations, okay? So literally, someone dies in Beaver County, okay? Beaver County coroner. Is happens to be a funeral director. I went to high school with him. And basically, they are the head of the investigation from an administrative standpoint, okay? That's all it is. So you have to hire somebody that is a pathologist and an autopsy technician and all that to do the actual investigation and autopsy procedure.
So basically like a general contractor.
They just sign the paperwork.
Yeah.
Here's what we were provided by these people. They sign paperwork. That's all it is.
The reason I ask you that is because you see on the news, it'll say like coroner called.
Yep.
And my interpretation of it is like a guy comes up in a van, brings a black bag, carries, gets people out of there and takes them where they need to be.
So there'll be a field investigator usually.
Yeah.
There'll be the actual coroner themselves or a deputy coroner and then delivery driver, okay? Or they could all be the same person.
Oh.
Depends on how small the department is. Depends on how small the department and the budget.
Did you say
is.
a delivery driver?
Livery.
Oh.
L-I-V. They deliver people, but they are livery drivers.
I was like, delivery driver. Maybe they could come up with a little bit better of a term.
And it stems from way back when horse-drawn carriages were used. That's what a livery is. Like liveries, you'll still hear that term used.
Oh,
That's
really?
So it's back when it was horse-drawn carriages where it comes from.
Huh.
So depending on where you're at, that position could be held by all three of the same people. Okay.
Yeah.
And the training and regulations for it are very loose. I've known people that are funeral directors that were the coroner, the removal person, and the field investigator, and they were never trained in anything real, for real. So, but they work in like rural Montana, okay?
Yeah.
So you're not going to see that here in Pittsburgh. You might see it out in, farther north towards Erie and some rural counties. But the coroner, that's all they do. They're just an elected administrative position. So they have to hire and contract people out to do the job for them.
Yeah.
So either way, so when there's been a determination that a death is suspicious or there's something just that's just not of the ordinary, they can request an autopsy. So basically, it can come from law enforcement or it can come from the actual coroner's office saying, hey, we think this is a suspicious death. Then they look at, and they do an external examination, photographs, things like that. And if there's anything, kind of odd, if there's a wound or whatever, you investigate it. If there's nothing external, then you start your internal things. And you can basically, so a full autopsy would be considered literally taking everything out of the body, every organ out.
Every single one.
Yeah, so you start with the head. So yeah, there's an incision made in the back of the head. And we use reciprocating saw. So if you ever had
I know exactly what
cast,
you're talking about.
It's exactly how they take a cast off. It only goes through hard material, not soft.
How does that work?
It's just super vibrating. It's funny. Every time we have new students in the lab, we would show them, we're like, give me your hand. And we'd stick the saw on
and it does nothing on your hand?
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Really?
Will not cut soft tissue. It only works on hard
I've only
surfaces.
had a cast one time, and I had to cut it off myself.
Okay. So you didn't get to go in and do the
I
reciprocating.
cut it off after 2 weeks because there was not a chance I wasn't playing my last game of football.
Gotcha. Well, it's funny. That's the thing. Most people, that's their experience with the reciprocating saw.
Yeah.
So all it does is it just works on a super fast vibrating motion and will only cut hard.
Huh.
So we basically cut in through the skull, take it off, take the brain out, things like that, investigate everything on the inside there. And then there's what's called a Y incision where we start at the very top of your shoulders.
What you see in the movies and shit.
Exactly. Comes down to the top of your sternum and then down to the basically right above like where your pelvic region is.
Yeah.
And then all the organs are taken out there. And they're basically investigated piece by piece by myself. That's my job, is I take a look at them and take a look from the outside and see anything I can see. Then I give them to the pathologist, and the pathologist cuts them into fine little pieces and looks on the inside. So what I do is called dissection. What they do is called prosection.
Prosection.
So I'm the dissector. He's the prosector. And then he does his determination as a doctor and really makes the final call as to what the actual primary cause of death is and any underlying causes that might have been a preliminary lead up. So it's really interesting sometimes where you think going in, okay, here's what I think's happening in this person, and you find two things inside them that were undiagnosed completely that actually killed them.
Really?
Or you find what you thought killed them, and you find something undiagnosed them that could have killed them at any second.
Oh, wow.
Like cancer, undiagnosed cancer.
You could see what that looks like if you open things up?
Oh, yeah. Gross pathology, you can see a very large amount of disease processes in gross pathology without having to go to a microscope. And it's astounding to see how many people have things in them that they had no idea that were there. Genetic anomalies where, there's like 10% of the population only has one kidney.
Really?
And it's wild to see how many times I've come across that where there's just nothing on the other side. Or there's variations. You could have something called a horseshoe kidney, where instead of 2 on each side, you have 1 continuous U-shaped kidney that looks like a horseshoe.
Really?
10% of the population has it. I've seen it several times.
Wow.
And you never find out until you either have an issue where you have a scan done or you have to become a kidney donor or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just the machine that the body is so astounding, and how there's just never been 2 days that have ever been the same. Never 2 cases the same. Is
there any cases where you do this dissection and they do that prosection and they can't come up with anything?
Every once in a while, and that's an undetermined, okay?
Yeah.
And the most common undetermined case is SIDS, okay, which is sudden infant death syndrome.
Yeah.
It's the hardest case anybody that works in pathology will ever work on. Like, forget your gunshots, forget all those homicides. SIDS cases are the ones that haunt you because you cannot come up with any reason.
It's literally they just die, right?
They just die. It's breathing related. It's something related to cardiopulmonary distress, but there's just no explanation for it.
And it happened, and it's somewhat common,
it's
right?
More common than you'd think. And there's another thing we talk about where it's on the far scale of the death things where it's undetermined. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of people, you'd be surprised how many people have had a SIDS death, you know what I mean, things like that, or someone that has known somebody. And they don't usually talk about it, you know what I mean, because it's one of those, the parents get blamed at first.
Yeah.
Because it can look like abuse, and there's cases where we think it's SIDS, and we find out parents were sleeping with their baby on the couch, and they rolled over on them. Because you find the impression of the fabric. You'll see like You'll see the shirt.
God.
You'll see the flannel shirt that dad was wearing in the photographs, and then you'll find the impression on the baby.
And that's a thing. Like you
it's happened. Accidental rollovers, things like that.
Oh my God, that would be the worst.
The SIDS cases often begin as an investigation as abuse or homicide.
Yeah.
And then the parents are stigmatized. So it's a cause that I've kind of like taken up. Like I remember I was very friendly with the head of the Pittsburgh SIDS organization, who actually just died last year, and oh man, she was a really great person, like an advocate for SIDS. But that's one of those cases where it's really hard to figure out, like, how do you wrap your head around that? Like, people don't just die.
Yeah.
Especially babies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's tough to work on those kind of cases because the littlest ones are the toughest. You know what I mean? Because you should be able to figure it out, and you should be able to know and give that family an answer, because they're going to be fearful that it's something that's genetic. You never know what happens when you have another one.
Yeah. And
that happens. So it's tough to not give an answer. And it's like, man, kids don't have time to develop all these things.
Yeah.
So you should have a clear-cut answer, and you can't. So, yeah, it's tough.
Man, I didn't even think about that. The whole because I've definitely heard about SIDS before, and I guess I never thought too deep into it to understand it.
You'll never have somebody explain it to you unless you know somebody that went through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a shame. And so, I mean, now let's say from a law enforcement aspect of it all, as far as like, cop says that there was something that happened, they need an autopsy here. Like, how do you go about it as far as like a crime aspect of it? I mean, is it the same way, the same process?
Well, it's interesting. So we do private cases for people that want to find out, like, did mom have Alzheimer's disease? Okay.
Yeah. That's
a purely private autopsy where no hospital will pay for it and no medical examiner will do it, because it's just health issues. It's not, even though it's what killed them, it's not that's what it is. Usually an autopsy is going to be something that is going to be a concern for the public health.
Yeah.
Whether a homicide or a disease process.
Yeah.
So families can always request one and they can be denied. Then they go and they pay a private one. Private autopsies at our firm started at $10,000.
$10,000?
Started at $10,000. Yes.
Holy shit.
And that was for the bare bones procedure. No toxicology, no screens done. Okay. So you got to spend money to make money, because most class action lawsuits or civil lawsuits will start at $1 million.
Wow.
So you look at the exponential money there. Okay.
Yeah.
But the crime investigation. So if it's actually done as a coroner or a medical examiner's office as a suspicious death, okay,
Yeah.
there are so many different components that could come into play with that. So if it's a car accident, okay, very, very common. Most cases we had were car accidents as far as accidental deaths, things like that. Or if it was a vehicular homicide case, like a DUI.
Yeah.
We had a case a couple years ago. I think it finally got resolved recently. But it was questionable as who was driving. Because someone was driving and someone else got killed, okay? And they were both drunk, and
They were both in the same car?
Yeah, and we had to, and there was like ejections and things like that.
Yeah.
So we had to determine who's driving, okay? How do you do that?
Yeah,
okay?
I couldn't even imagine.
Well, the one thing you can rely on is a little bit of is touch DNA, where when somebody impacts something, it's going to leave a skin cell or hair, things like that. And then the other part of it, so that's what you can find in maybe the vehicle, things like that. But the other part of it is called forensic biomechanics, okay? And it's its own little subspecialty field. And if you do enough car accidents, you have to learn about it because it's how you figure out what happened. And it's got a little bit of math and things like that in it. But basically it figures out how things move and how they strike things, okay? So it's angles and trajectories, things like that. So if you're in the driver's side of a car, okay, and the car rolls to the right, okay, you're going to move a certain direction in the vehicle and hit the headrest in a certain capacity, the steering wheel. Same thing in a forward like impact accident. You're going to move forward and strike the dashboard in certain spots.
Yeah.
If you're the person that's crossing the street and gets hit by a car, depending on the type of vehicle, the impact where the bumpers are going to hit you in a certain spot. We can tell a truck from a car. Like
yeah, on the
certain
area of the leg.
Certain hallmarks. They're called bumper marks. You know what I mean? Like
wow.
Seatbelt grooves, seatbelt impact.
That's what I was thinking of. Is like if someone's wearing a seatbelt, you'd be able to kind of see.
Impact bruise marks, okay, things like that.
Yeah.
Where they had which wrist was broken? Were they holding onto the steering wheel? Were they left or right-handed? You start going into all these components. What they have on them will tell you stories. Open their wallet. Start looking in their pockets. Last receipt you found will tell you the last place they were. You will know where they bought the last packet of cigarettes. If there's one cigarette out of it, and you can see the date stamp time receipt was a half an hour before the accident.
Wow.
And you can get video footage from that convenience store.
Who got in the front seat? Who got in the driver's seat?
Yeah, you track back.
Wow.
You track back.
Reverse engineering with it.
And it is. It's that solving problems and puzzles, and you learn where drug addicts hide their drugs on them. And you can find them. You know what I mean? And you open up their phone and you pull up their last call and you look to see what the message was. And then you find the stamp bag that has the name of the message.
Wow.
Like and you have such short period of time to do all this.
Yeah.
There's no do-overs. So you have to have that almost like insane, like critical thinking.
Where it's always going through your head. And
it pays to have that like can't stop thinking
that
thing
OCD
going on.
Type.
It does. It's where it helps because I can focus it so strong there. So, and that's the thing is I'm doing a very minor part on my end, right? There was the police, there's the other investigators, but it's what I see from my perspective in the lab that then we can put together with the field investigator, with the pathologist. So it's interesting to think about, we're all just cogs, you know what I mean, in a wheel. And each person has their own little thing because I think about like my thing in the lab is I was always the youngest person. And coming from skateboarding and the counterculture in general, like music and art and things like that, I know what people's tattoos mean.
Yeah.
I know their shirts. I know what band they listen to.
I didn't even think about that.
You know what I mean? Like you see a Cottonmouth King shirt or Sublime, man, you probably got some drug use going on and it's probably marijuana. Like, but you can tie these things in. When you know like certain gang logos or band logos.
I did not even think about that.
Things like that. And it pays off because my bosses were much older and they didn't pick up on those
Yeah, they didn't understand what that was.
And you'd see certain things and you're like, okay, like I guarantee you, like I can guess what's going on with what they do for fun or, you know what I mean? Or their what they might consume at a party, things like that.
Something like that. Is a toxicology report? Is that like, is that normal? Like, if there's something like that, do they always do one?
Okay, so there's toxicology screens that are done on every case, essentially, like every coroner's case. So it depends on what each coroner's office determines they want done.
Yeah.
And usually draw blood, urine, bile, are the most common biological samples drawn. Then you can start getting into like muscles and nerve tissues, things like that.
Yeah.
But most commonly, those are the fluids that are drawn. And there's a battery of tests that get run that are considered to be drug screens of abuse and like common abuse and pharmaceutical use. So it would be your broad spectrum of things that people use in daily medicine, things like that. Okay, but that all changed when the drug epidemic really hit.
Yeah.
You couldn't just do that general screen anymore. You would have to try to find out, what do we think they were using? Because when you look at the book of testing and screening that gets done, we use one of the largest labs in the country outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And it's so expensive to do drug screening of any sort, any kind of toxicology screening. So you had to really say, okay, we're going to use the general screen here, and then we are taking a guess that they might have used this because it was something we found in their pocket.
Because you can't just run all the tests because it's a lot of money.
Synthetic marijuana, when that rage came out,
yeah.
that was one of the most dangerous things we came across because it's being made by people in homemade labs or in China. And what the problem was with that was it was a synthetic marijuana in the bath salts, which are just anything you're spraying anything onto. What happened was the FDA would try to say, okay, whatever this drug component is that's in this bath salt or the synthetic marijuana, we're going to outlaw it as of today. And it was, hydroxycarboxyl hexamethylamphetamine or something like that. Well, the chemist then would say, okay, well, if that's illegal, I'm going to take one chemical component out and change it.
Wow.
And sell it again. And then the FDA will say, we'll make that illegal. How many times? You can never stay ahead of the chemist.
I didn't think about that. That's fucking crazy.
You can never stay ahead of the chemistry. So that's why those synthetic drugs are so dangerous, because who knows what they are.
Yeah.
And they're being sprayed onto just some herbal product.
Yeah.
And then
Incense.
and then you're ingesting these things. So, and where we saw that was, the big spike in that was, believe it or not, high school and college athletes.
Yeah, because they can't,
because the
fail
drug
the tests.
testing isn't common.
Yeah.
So people were using that to get around drug testing, and I'm like, that to me is the most frightening thing, is you are now not using something as not harmless. Marijuana is not a harmless thing.
Yeah.
But to end run using something as benign, I would say, as marijuana in comparison to this stuff that is killing people, it's causing seizures and irreversible brain damage.
That's a whole different ball of wax. It's just insane. The whole marijuana, it's ridiculous. Everyone could come home. It's ridiculous. People could come home and be like, man, I'm going to have a couple beers tonight. But people can't come home and smoke a bowl. But because of all these, times
are changing, clearly.
Yeah,
look
times
where
are
we're at in
changing.
Pennsylvania.
They are. Times are changing. Now, let me go back to a minute. So the reason I ask you all these things about this autopsy and about like the crime aspect of it all is like what I'm thinking of is like, the inspections of a body as far as like, if there's fibers on there or fingerprints or anything like that. Is that you that deals with that, or is that a different cog in the wheel?
It begins at the scene investigation.
Okay, that's what I figured.
I've never been to a scene before. That is a totally different component. Okay?
That makes sense, because I didn't know if it was,
And it has to be separate, because you have to have different checks and balances that come through.
Yeah.
So the scene does the photography and the initial evidence collection. Okay. So imagine coming into this room and saying, I need to sweep the carpet for any fibers.
Jesus.
Okay, this is only like a 12 by 12, 14 by 14, whatever, something like room.
Big.
Think about that. How much evidence could be in this room just in hair samples?
That makes sense. And for the transport from one area to another, like that's a whole different
they take
thing.
all that stuff and go back to the lab with it and then do their stuff. Okay. Then they would bring the body to the laboratory, and then the field investigator there would come and say, okay, here's the pictures from the scene. They would show us pictures that they had. So then I would do my thing, and I start looking around and be like, okay, I see a cat scratcher pad over there, so there's going to be cat fibers in this room, clearly, okay? I'll see like a hairbrush or something or whatever. I'm like, all right, somebody's got longer hair in this room. Like you start doing that. And you're like, what could I come across that might be attached to this case?
Jeez.
So then you're doing the external thing. You're taking photographs, and sometimes, man, like your flash will catch something. And you're like, ooh, what was that? You know what I mean? Like you'll catch something. One of my favorite things to find on people is glitter.
Really?
Okay, because glitter's on a lot of stuff. Okay, but usually it means you're probably at a party, maybe. Okay. Or strip club. Okay.
That's a good point.
And you start finding receipts and things like that. But I've found one piece of like tiny pink. It's in one of my slideshows, this tiny pink of glitter. And I pull the slide up all the time and I say, okay, guys, can you find the evidence in this picture?
And you got something from that one piece of glitter.
Well, it shows you with this strip club that corroborated against somebody's alibi and things like that. So you're doing timelines, things like that.
Wow. That's fucking crazy.
So it's wild. You can get something that minute, okay? And then you can start coming across something that you have to know a little more about. Because, I mean, glitter's glitter, okay? It's just it's a little pink thing. But you can come across some evidence where, say, for example, you had somebody that was a suspected homicide. And they're covered in flies, okay? Which is very common. And you start looking at the flies themselves, okay? And we can cut down into a timeline within 4 to 8 hours, within pretty good certainty of when they died, depending on the flies. Okay.
Why is that?
Just the flies. Okay. So forensic entomology is the study of insects as applied to science and law.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing field. I was considering getting a master's in it a few years ago, but there's no work in it, so it's useless. But basically, what it is, it's you study insects and how they interact with dead bodies, okay? Because there's a lot of insects that actually like consume dead bodies. Everyone thinks, oh, flies and maggots. Okay, those are the number ones. It's actually green bottle flies are the very first thing that can smell a dead body within 1 mile, and they're
1 mile,
and they're on you. Yep.
Are butterflies one?
Nope.
I saw, of course not. I saw something random on Facebook.
Not that I've ever heard of. That I've ever heard of. And I raise monarch butterflies, so they're safe.
Really? Buffalo Bill.
But it's wild. Like literally, there's green and blue bottle flies. They're the number 1 and number 2. And then it goes down in range of certain types depending on where you're at in the state even or where you live. But beetles and centipedes actually love us, okay?
Really?
But flies have a very, very specific, life cycle, okay, from the time they're the little maggot to where they're what's called a dry fly, okay? And so we can literally take a look at the stage of the maggot or the fly on and around the person, okay, and determine kind of in a relative way, depending on the weather and the atmosphere, how long it took. So there's 3 different stages they go through and all this, but yeah, you can, if you see what's called a wet fly, it's one of the rarest things ever. It means they just hatched and just came out and have not been able to dry off enough yet to fly. It's a fly that can't fly.
Wow.
So when you see those kind of things, there's certain hallmarks with how these bugs develop that you can tell within 4 to 8 hours how long this person's been dead.
Insane.
And there was a case like that set a precedent in basically in forensic history. It was in Pennsylvania that came out of a case in Erie years ago. It's on a lot of forensic shows. You'll see it all the time. It's been on several shows where a guy kidnapped this woman and basically said, like, I want the ransom and all this kind of stuff. And killed her and put her in the woods. Never even intended to collect the ransom. But his alibi was basically broken by fly testimony.
Wow.
And it was the first time it ever happened. And this was back in the 90s. And a few years ago, I did the autopsy on the prisoner that was sent there.
No way.
It was wild. We handled
the guy who killed her.
Yeah, we handled all the cases from Greene County State Correctional Institution, which is death row. So we had all the state death row inmates would we do their autopsies.
Wow.
And this guy came in, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, why does he look familiar? Why would I know somebody like on death row? And I'm like, oh, we saw the name, and we remember the case because it had set that like the legal precedent for
that is insane.
Testimony. And that's just how small that industry is sometimes. But something that small and just like almost benign, like a fly or a piece of glitter, things like that. Cat hairs, dog hairs are traceable. You can trace animal DNA back to that animal. Those have been utilized. to track people and things like that. So sometimes it's very, very small things.
Wow.
That
minute details that could break it out.
And it is. And sometimes I would see it. Sometimes my boss would see it and I would miss it. You notice certain things too. Like certain people have an eye for certain things. One case we were working on this case, my boss realized, he's like, hey, did you notice something strange about their dress? And I'm like, well, yeah. I was like, the one pocket is pulled out and the one isn't. He's like, no, man, one sock's different than the other. Like we even would see different things like that right in front of each other.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So the more eyes in the room, sometimes the better. The more eyes on an investigation, the better off you are. Because we all have certain things that we pay attention to in our own way. And that's what I always tell people is my boss and I, we would drive around going to and from work, and we would do that. We're like, okay, what's weird about that guy right there? And we would see different things.
That's incredible.
And it's all depends on just, how you kind of were trained when you were a kid as an observer.
Yeah.
And things like that. So it's very interesting when we would be training students in the lab. I'm like, what do you see? What do you see here? And it's the same way I do it when I embalm, because we all do a case analysis in our own way. And it's so wild to see, how they
everyone
see
does it.
And how you can train people to see certain things.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. That's why when we study disease process, there's so much we can learn from fingernails,
Really?
teeth, and eyes.
Huh.
They tell us so much. You can tell heart disease by looking at people's eyes, things like that. Heart disease, cardiovascular issues. I can tell if you smoke from looking at your fingernails.
Really?
Yep, things like that. Absolutely.
Jeez. Do you tend to I'm gonna end up getting to the end of this podcast just because I feel like I talked to you forever. But now, do you tend to kind of get involved with things as far as like a specific case that I was just thinking of is like for a while you were seeing people's bodies wash up in the river.
We go into Dakota James.
Well, I mean, not even getting as
That was a big one.
That's
That
a
was
huge one,
big one.
and that's super interesting to me. You have that show, The Smiley Face Killer, whatever.
Okay. I've been asked about that more than any case.
Well,
in the past few years.
I don't even want you to get detailed about anything like that, but I'm saying like cases like that. Do you tend to find yourself like your mind like dipping into things like that and like the details of things?
I do because the natural curiosity will never go away once I've been into it.
Yeah.
And it's weird. You almost want to interject yourself sometimes, things like that. But I think what's odd is, especially with that case, is it's local. You know what I mean? It's tied local, things like that. And everyone asked me my opinion on it. Like, everybody wants to know about that case. And people are crazy about that.
What do you think about it?
Well, okay. And this is what I think about this case. Okay, so we're a river city. A lot of people end up in the rivers here, okay? And a lot of people take their own lives here.
Yeah.
And it's very common when you have river cities, things like that, and there are accidents, people are intoxicated, things like that. But it's odd. Serial killers are exceedingly rare, okay? Exceedingly rare. Even in this day and age, exceedingly rare. Remember, I said accidents, suicides, things like that are way more common. I think the Dakota James case, I honestly think that guy either took his own life or accidentally fell in the river. I think he was intoxicated. He had depression and mental illness issues that the family clouded a lot, that they did not seem to really discuss very openly
really?
a lot.
Is that true?
Well, when you look at that case, okay, everything you heard about it was they had money. They had money to throw at this case.
Yeah.
Okay? They're a wealthy family. He was a grad student at Duquesne, okay? And they're trying to compare it to these other cases. Okay, if you look at the other cases, okay, they're very similar kind of characters. You know what I mean? People that had some like mental health and depression issues, things like that. I think there were some drug issues, I think, as well, that they did not really openly discuss a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, in the media, but it's come out because when you open the can of worms, it all comes out. I think they were in doubt or even like just a little bit of like denial about what he had going on.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to play along that thing that he was killed.
Yeah,
everyone wants it to be
that's
this
almost like glorified
case.
that it's like a homicide or something.
And I think it's really sad and depressing that people are giving them hope that it is something else. And I was really shocked that Dr. Wecht played along on their thing. I don't know if they paid him. I don't have access to those files, so I cannot give a true determination from my professional standpoint.
And that's fine.
But it's funny. What I've seen that's released publicly, it really lines up. Here's the wild thing. You want to know? We talk about how small this town and the business is. One of my wife's coworkers found his body.
No
on Neville
way.
Island. Was out walking their dog. Yeah, that's how tiny these cases are.
Holy
sometimes.
shit!
And the condition he was in was very, very good. He was readily identifiable in the water.
See, this is what's so weird to me. Okay, and this is my keyboard, whatever you want to call it.
It's called keyboard forensics.
Keyboard forensics.
CSI. Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Keyboard forensics. I don't even have cable. I just hear about what's going on, and I see what's going on, and I watch that Smiley Face TV show or whatever, and of course, people watch that and they get their ideas and they think that they could do this shit tomorrow. But the one guy who was like a forensics diver, like a body recovery guy, said that the state that his body was in was immaculate compared to the last however many years. So they were saying like, oh, someone had him and then they threw him in there after or some shit like that. But
look, when he fell in, it's the water temperature. Yeah. When you go in the wintertime, bodies will never stay in the water. They'll always come up.
What was interesting is they were saying that like there's so many things in the river that there was not even like abrasions or marks on him or some shit like that. So him getting drugged down the river, you would think he would run into, there's cars in there, there's fucking all kinds of shit. So you would think he would get some damage, his body would get damaged. But they said that whenever he seen him, his body was never... that his body was in better shape than any other body he's ever brought up.
The water was cold. It was wintertime.
Yeah.
Remember he had the tassel capping on it?
Yeah.
And the water was running high, I think. So, which happens. There was a guy that just survived going over Niagara Falls last month, tried to kill himself.
Do you know that there's 40 people a year that die over there?
Mm-hmm.
That I just heard about that whenever
this guy survived.
That's fucking crazy.
Because there was huge rainstorms. I know several students from Buffalo that live up there.
So the water was high, so he wasn't at the bottom of the...
And it pushed him out over farther than he normally would have. If it was normal, he would have been dead.
Wow.
And so, but that's the thing is there's the Emsworth lock down there that he went over and got down past. But I think that's it. I think it was high water. It was cold. And I've seen bodies that have gone into the water and come back up 5 days later in pristine condition.
Really?
Every 5 feet you go down, it starts to go down another 5 degrees or like 3 degrees.
Yeah.
You get down in those rivers like 15 feet. It's cold, and bodies are preserved. So that's the thing. Like I said, there's so much, conjecture and rumor about those cases. But then you try to tie his murder into the rest of these. Man, no one's traveling that far. Like that, you look at the propensity for serial killers to work in a certain area. Man, there's no way people are moving between cities like that. Like I really don't think that there's that capacity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you look at way back with people that traveled like Bundy and things like that. Like he didn't even have that kind of range and things like that.
But what about all the bodies that are around here? That they had to find 6 different guys in the rivers around Pittsburgh.
Well, here's the other thing too. So in a very great contrast, right around when Dakota James happened. Okay, there was another case that was in the news right around the same time. African American guy in his like 20s or 30s. I think he was from like the Strip District or something like that.
Yeah.
Or Lawrenceville or whatever, and disappeared. And they found him in the river, like way down.
Did they find him in the Ohio River?
Like,
is that the one?
Way down. Yeah,
I think
I
do remember that.
And there was no news, no story about it. No one cared because he wasn't a rich white kid. I mean, it was the media attention that that family was putting into it.
Yeah.
They would come up and do these massive searches. That stuff isn't free. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they had money to throw at it. And you look at the contrast between that African American gentleman and the Dakota James story. No one knew what that guy's name was, and he was murdered and things like that. You know what I mean? So it lends to the truth that, there could be a homicide involved and things like that. But when you do kind of like what's called a forensic, like a psychological autopsy, you go back 6 months to a year in somebody's life and look at what they were going through, it kind of lines up with the fact that he was a troubled young man.
And I don't mean
They
to
had
open this
issues.
can of worms on you.
No. It's just no. I've talked openly about it before. It's just when you watch that show, man, they seem to be really reaching and stretching and things like that.
Yeah,
and they're selling a show.
They're that's
selling
exactly
a
it.
show.
They're selling different points that make it interesting and make people believe things that they want and want more in a certain direction.
Yeah. And like I said, and the wild thing is until we get the real answer, you know what I mean? Everything's valid to an extent, you know, so you can't discount anything. And it's really wild because, like I said, I wish I could get the files.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I could see those files. I could give you a little better answer.
Now let me ask you one more thing, and then I'll end this because, like I said, I could talk to you forever. This shit is crazy interesting to me. Now, let's say any body like that in the water, I'm sure has a different set of rules from whenever you're trying to do autopsies. Is that true?
Okay, it does and it's funny because when this Dakota James case happened, it made me do my homework. Okay, I literally because I have every forensic training manual. There's an Old Testament and a New Testament basically. There's two texts you read. And both the guys are like, you've seen them. They are the guys that testify in trials and things like that. Okay?
Yeah.
So I pulled out the books and really started reading up on because there's freshwater and saltwater, issues. Okay?
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Fresh and saltwater issues because the way your body absorbs water, if you breathe water in, when you're still alive because you can't breathe it in when you're dead, So when you take water into your lungs, saltwater and freshwater have different buoyancy capacities because of the salt, the way it expands. Okay?
Wow.
And salt water, of course, is toxic if you take it in, and breathe it in, things like that, and aspirate it much quicker. So your lung volume and oxygen density changes between these two. So you can kind of tell how long somebody was actually maybe alive. Were they breathing when they entered the water and things like that, depending on if they actually took water into their lungs.
Is there no way, if they're dead and they go into the river, there's no way to get water into your lungs like that?
You can't inhale it at that point, right? Like you can't.
It can't even leak down in there.
No, because there's all these pressure systems built up so that things cannot leak or seep in. You would have to actively take it in and breathe it in.
Wow.
So that was the thing that they were looking at, was the oxygen density levels, things like that. But it really made me do my homework to where I was like, man, I wish I could see the paperwork on that stuff. That would give me a better determination. I'm sure they did all that, all that investigation into it.
Yeah.
But it comes down sometimes to where science is only 99.9% accurate. There's no 100%. So you take a look at what's there and you kind of make your calculated guess and things like that. But like I said, there's so much contained in just the type of drowning death possibility. And was he intoxicated? He left bars, things like that. So that has to do with your alcohol level, the temperature of the water. Yeah, all those things come into play. So without seeing that report, it's really hard to make that determination from a true scientific standpoint. But you hear all those stories. You hear about the diver. You hear about the person that finds them and all that. And it's it's one of those cases I hope we get an answer, because I hope that family gets an answer someday. I mean, having that false hope, or
is
just
it possible to get
knowing,
an answer right now?
Somebody knows.
Well, yeah. Besides for someone that's outside of that, but like he's buried, like, right?
Yeah,
like
there's nothing else. I don't think he's gonna tell us from that perspective. You know what I mean? So
wow.
And you think about it, man. All those cameras down there and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. You don't see
there.
And like the narratives that are built on TV shows about, like there's a serial killer going after gay men, in Pittsburgh and shit like that. And people like to latch onto to an idea and run with it.
Yeah, for whatever reason. And I think that, it's interesting to see how the entertainment industry makes a lot of money off it.
It's fucked up.
And it's kind of strange, because I think about that, like, the families get dragged in, and it's almost like false hope that they're going to get that
false
answer
hope.
They want.
Absolutely.
And I think there's that's the problem, is when you're in denial about, denial is so common.
You reach for anything that is going to bring any light.
And when people give you that kind of false hope, it's almost sad.
But you can't blame them, really.
Oh, exactly. Well, here's the thing, too. I know that in that case specifically, they went to the medical examiner and asked them their opinion, and they're like, look, here's how it happened. They went to Dr. Wecht, okay, of course he's going to give them something different than a medical examiner is, because he's diametrically opposed to them. Like, he used to work for them, and he and Carl don't get along on anything. So they always are going to give a different opinion. But then I think they went and got a third opinion, I think. Because Dr. Wecht still won't say, yeah, it was definitely a homicide. He's like, I can't tell.
Yeah.
I think they actually went out and sought a third opinion. So think about how much money that is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
I think you can throw money at grief a lot when you have it as a resource.
Yeah.
And you can
and hope for something positive out of it.
And that's the saddest part about it is, I hope that family gets resolution someday, because that's the worst thing we see in our business is people that can't get the final end and the final
closure.
And to move on with their life and things like that. Because if we ever see them again, it never leaves.
Wow.
Never leaves.
All right, man. All right. Jesus, what a heavy, what a super interesting and heavy talk. And this is the ending segment of the podcast. It tends to bring some light to any sort of conversation that I have, but I do an ending segment with all my guests. It's called Desert Island Questions. Desert Island Questions is a segment where I give each guest 3 categories to take with them on a desert island to exhaust until death. So the first category I give each of my guests is 3 things to watch with them on a desert island. So you could bring whole movie series, whole TV series, whole whatever you want, but 3 choices on things to watch.
All right. Definitely MASH.
MASH. Wow. Okay.
Absolutely one of my all-time favorite shows. I'm a Hawkeye Pierce man. Oh boy, let's see. Quite honestly, Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty. I still have not yet to break into that yet, but I know it's incredible.
It's funny. I'm a cartoon guy. I grew up on this kind of stuff, but from a scientific standpoint,
that's what everyone says. It's incredible like that.
Feel dumb. Like, I have a friend who's actually is an astrophysicist.
Yeah.
Like, he does that level of work. And I have to reference things with him sometimes. I swear.
That's what so many people say to me. Like, they say that it's, it's goofy, it's silly, but then it's layered in so many ways.
It is. It's really funny, and you have to be smart to enjoy that show. That's why I like it. I like it for that fact.
I got to watch it.
And I would say, wow, man, oof, one more choice. Honestly, it's probably it's one of the things that it's funny that my wife and I really enjoy watching a lot, because it connects us to our childhood. Is that 70s show?
Oh, that's good.
That show makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And that's what I think about. That's what I want to do when I come home, is not watch stuff that's too serious.
Yeah, that's too heavy.
Because I just did all that all day.
I do have to adamantly say you need to watch Mindhunter.
Okay.
It's absolutely worth it. It's
Gotcha.
not too long, but it's worth it.
We need a new series, so I'm on it.
Yeah, that'll be good. All right, so the second category, do you read?
I do.
So 3 books to take with you.
All right. Let's see. 3 books. Animal Farm, George Orwell.
Okay.
Because that was one of my earliest ones that I just grew attached to, and have just always. It's funny. I love Animals from Pink Floyd, because it's based on that story as well.
And, yeah.
It's just so funny thinking about that. I live my life a lot based on that concept of Animal Farm and Animals from Pink Floyd. Let's see. I would say, something more recent. The Soul Made Flesh. Soul Made Flesh. It is a book I read about 3 or 4 years ago. And it is a story about when modern anatomy discovered that the brain is what makes human beings what we are.
Really?
It was extremely controversial, because it was, right after the Renaissance, when people were still not allowed to dissect bodies and things like that.
Yeah.
And that it was still the church ruled medical science and said, we are controlled by spirits. We are controlled by demons. We have these fluids in us that make us good and bad. They were called the humors and all this. So they really believed that that's how, and that's why bloodletting let out the bad demons and things like that. So that archaic medicine concept, abruptly kind of got kicked in the teeth, because all of a sudden a couple of these guys were like, man, the brain and it makes electrical pulses happen. They discovered this. they couldn't talk about it at first because they would be executed, things like that. So it talks about that kind of evolution of medical science that was based around that breakthrough. So yeah, I actually I recommend it. I bought copies of it at our school library, and I recommend my students in psychology to read it. I said it'll help you understand.
What was it called again?
The Soul Made Flesh.
The Soul Made Flesh.
I can't remember the author, but Soul Made Flesh. Very, very interesting because it really describes how like modern medicine came to being and how it seems so archaic the way we used to think and how simple, our brain and all this, but it was groundbreaking.
The religious aspect of things is
absolutely
the most insane thing to think about. There's a TV show called A Handmaid's Tale. You familiar with that?
I've heard about it, absolutely.
Me and my wife watch it, and it's probably one of the most fucked up shows I've ever seen. And it's basically about a new world order. Do you know the idea of it?
Oh yeah.
So, but the craziest part about the entire show is like, instead of if someone breaks a law, it's not like the actual law that they reference verses from Bibles.
Yep.
And that's the punishment that they get: stoning, hanging,
eye for an eye, and things
fucking
like that.
insane. But yeah, religion, man, crazy. All right, third one.
Let's see. So let's see. Those are pretty
Big Brother
good ones.
magazine. No, just kidding.
And it's kind of funny too because I used to do a lot more magazine reading and things like that, and I've kind of like steered away from that. But honestly, the one I would love to have back is the original. I would love the original version of Wired magazine.
Wired magazine.
Wired was so interesting.
What was it?
It was basically technology, but it wasn't. It had gadgets and things like that. I'm not a gadget guy. I don't have like a lot of money. I don't spend my money on like iPhones and things like that.
Yeah.
But it had gadget stuff, but it was like up and coming technology.
Okay.
And I would see things in it that like touched like me. Like they would have things about like how prosthetics have changed throughout history based on warfare.
Really?
Medical science always benefits from warfare. Like every time we have a war, all of a sudden, boom, we get like something new happens, okay? Whether it's plastic surgery, prosthetics, things like that. But Wired was really amazing because it would have really interesting stuff and they would have themed issues. Huh. And some of them, I swear they were like written for me. Like I would get it and it's like, I like every single part of this.
That's pretty interesting.
And then it just totally made a left turn and just I stopped my subscriptions to it. So original Wired magazine. Yeah, there we go.
All right. Those are three good choices. That seems to be interesting for a lifetime on a desert island. Third category is 3 things to listen to.
Ooh. Oh, wow. I'm going to do a broad stretch on this one.
That's all right.
Number 1 would be the entire Grateful Dead catalog.
Okay.
Because I'm a huge Deadhead.
I was going to wear a Grateful Dead shirt that said "Dead" on it because
I almost wore my Steal Your Face because that's quite common in my wardrobe.
it felt right. But I mean, this the Heaven's Gate called. I felt it's all right too.
It's Grateful Dead definitely. I listen to them like every day, like more than anything probably.
All right.
And I'm a late comer. I've listened to Dead my whole life, and I just got bit hard a couple of years ago, and I can't get enough of it. I play along with it all the time. So,
all right.
Dead. Let's see, and then we'll get tighter on these. Kind of Blue from Miles Davis.
Okay.
That was the first jazz album I got into. When I go through music, I kind of become like a snob. I get like sucked into it and like
become a gatekeeper.
I stopped
almost
listening to everything else. You know what I mean? I get snobby about it. I did a heavy duty jazz phase, but I got into Miles Davis through the Allman Brothers band, actually, of all places.
Really?
Because Dwayne Allman, when he got really into like woodshedding real hard, got into jazz and got into Kind of Blue from Miles Davis because that was always the most accessible jazz album of all time. Like that's how you get into jazz is usually Kind of Blue.
I'm going to listen to it.
And it's phenomenal. If you don't like jazz, like it's a great way to get into it and get it at a base level and then branch out from whatever direction.
We went to a jazz club somewhere that I traveled, and it was so fucking awesome. Real low lit, booths, leather booths and everything, and just a random guy up there, and it was just so incredible. Just the vibe of it was awesome.
A broad sweeping music form that if you hear the wrong version at the wrong time, you're like, wow, you know what I mean? So, but Kind of Blue is awesome. Well, Dwayne Allman listened to Kind of Blue. He went to sleep listening to it every day for 1 year.
Really?
And I did that. I like to do immersion learning, so I did that. I went to sleep for the metronome for a while, but I listened to Kind of Blue every night for a year as I went to sleep, and it what's taught me how to learn improvisation. Because it does. It has a very, very basic structure where it's based around a very small chord structure, and then each instrumentalist just goes off and does their thing. And I was like, how the hell do you do that?
Wow.
How do you do that? Like, how the hell do you do that? And it taught me to do that. And just by like sleeping to it, it just would allow me to totally relax and immerse myself. So yeah, kind of blue, definitely. And oh man, one last one. Okay, it's going to be one song.
All right.
And I realized that this is actually probably it's probably like my favorite song from the 80s, which was a wasteland of music. Promises from Fugazi.
All right.
It's the end of 13 songs. It's the very last song. First song is Waiting Room, and the end is Promises. And it's so funny. I was listening to, someone put that in my ear about a month and a half ago. And I'm listening to it every day on my way to work.
Promises for Fugazi.
I like repeat it 2 or 3 times.
I don't know if I've ever listened to it. I'm going to listen to it.
It's just like the lyrics are on as always, but dude, the music on that is like, it's just like the best, like it was the best end for like music in the 80s.
Huh.
But yeah, I realized that I was always a Fugazi guy, but yeah, like Promises from Fugazi, I think would be as a song.
Those seem to be good choices as well. Nice broad section of choices. All right, second to last question is the death row meal. So you ever see them morbid articles of people that are dying? So you could have as much as you want from wherever you want, as many places.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess we're going to do the appetizer round. It would be one of my salsas. I make salsa. I have a
really.
I'm a big. In fact, I forgot to ask you if you liked hot salsa.
Oh, I love it.
I will be getting you some. But yeah, I do like organic gardening, and I make salsa and hot sauces. So it'd have to be some of my hot sauce or salsa.
Wow, and, I love both of those.
I have specific batches I would even probably choose from. Let's see, and then I would say honestly, like, wow. This is a tough one.
Very tough.
There's some good food around here. Let's see. What have I? Oh, you know what? Okay, there you go. I really like pizza. And
this is a
wood-fired pizza specifically recently.
Oh, yeah.
And I really, really like proper downtown, proper.
I have not heard. I've not eaten it yet, but people have told me about it.
We go there before we go to shows, and it's so good. And now they have this like brisket mac and cheese that they would fire.
That's up my alley. That's definitely up my alley.
Yeah, that one for me. And then wow, last but not least, here we go. Just because it's so just decadent, potato patch fries with cheese.
Ooh, that's a good choice. No one's ever picked that.
Because I think about that. That's one of the only reasons I even go to Kennywood now.
See, I'm actually, I'm gonna get dragged for this, but I'm actually not a big fan of potato patch.
Okay.
I'm just not a fan of fresh cut fries with the skin on them. Really, I like more of a.
I like it with the grease like that. Like
I like more of a crispy.
Usually I do, but for whatever reason, it's that grease and that cheese.
I think nostalgia holds a big
I think it does too.
Big factor in it as well. All right, those are very good choices. All right, so the last question that I ask everyone is, if you could have a conversation with anyone alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Ooh, this is one that always gets tossed around.
Yeah, I'm curious about this from you.
Here you go. I got it. Ooh, okay. It's a tough split. But honestly, Carl Jung.
Who is that?
He was the understudy of Freud. And
oh, really?
He's the guy that came up with the concept of synchronicity. He's the guy that took dream theory way beyond what Freud did. But basically, so I'm a big Freudian guy. I like Freud a lot because if you really read what Freud did and things like that, you got to steer away from like the proclivities of what he was focusing on, because it was Victorian era. Okay, everything in the Victorian era sucked. Okay, it was oppressive, things like that.
Yeah,
But when you look at what he was actually doing, he was the first person that ever listened to what women had to say. He was a proto-feminist in that sense. He was listening to women's problems when nobody would listen.
Yeah.
And he had his own weird stuff because he had mother issues, and he put that all into it because you always put yourself into your psychology. But Jung was his understudy, and was seeing what Freud was talking about and had a much more broader scope. I was like, okay, well, what happens if we do this? Because he realized
he went a little bit further.
Well, he really took it farther because he came up with this concept of synchronicity, which is a great album by The Police. And that's what the whole album's about, is his concepts. But you look at it, and he talks about how there is this interconnectivity with everything in the universe.
Really?
Specifically on planet Earth. And it's all connected to the electrical pulse that a lot of other people have talked about. But we are all connected in some way or another, okay? And the way it comes out, okay, what synchronicity is meaningful coincidence.
Meaningful coincidence.
So, for example, something we were talking about today, okay? Tomorrow, somebody else will talk about something related to what we were discussing here. And you're like, oh, man, we were talking about that last night. That is so wild. But meanwhile, what they were talking about is very common in their life, and what they talked about with you is very common in your life. But it came together because you and I talked about it around the same time.
Wow.
So it has meaning now. It's a meaningful coincidence. And you'll start to, once you see synchronicity happen, it'll happen all the time. It'll happen constantly around you. And you're like, did I create it?
Is that like people seeing, like looking at the clock and it's the same time all the time?
Similar things like that. It is. It's just random, meaningful, and you attach something to it. You attach a meaning to it.
You make it meaningful.
Right. So it's a song that you heard, the last time you heard it was blah, 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 or whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, it's my 30-year high school reunion, and I haven't heard that song since whatever, and you attach yourself to it. So, it'll happen all the time, yeah. But so I think talking to Carl Jung and being like, how did you come up with that?
I like that.
Because it is. I feel it so strong. I feel it so much in my life. And it does. It comes around in every capacity. It's skateboarding and funeral service and all this weird stuff that just keeps swinging back around.
Wow.
And I'm like, it's not going away. It's there. You know what I mean? So I think that would be it. I think because that concept to me is so like broad. It's like, how did you come up with that? Because it seems so tangible.
That is awesome. Well, man, I mean, I could honestly say this, and you know, I don't tell everyone this, but I think that this is probably my favorite episode that I've ever got to record.
Awesome. It's been fun.
It's very, very fascinating to me, and I'm very thankful that you took the time out to speak with me about it.
Thanks for having me.
Take some time and promote anything you want to promote.
I think we talked enough about what I do, but I mean, if anybody is interested at all in funeral service, honestly, you know, we're one of the top schools in the country, and we basically we look for people that want to make a change in their community and a change in themselves. And it's kind of funny. A lot of people don't think they have it in them to do with this, what we do.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised. So we tell people, you know, if you ever think you're interested in it, come talk to us and we'll see if it's right for you. But other than that, I think I said everything I had to say. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. One last thing. Was your nickname back in the day Tubes?
It was. It was. And that's how most people know me from the skateboarding world.
That's what
which
I heard.
Then transferred over into the lab because I'm all using test tubes and things like that. So yeah, that was the old nickname. I haven't heard that one for a while. So
I know Greg told me to ask you.
Yep.
All right. Everyone else, as usual, go shop at One Up Skate Shop. It's your local skate shop around the city. They're very, very great people. Keep them alive. Everyone's buying shit online. Go down to a brick and mortar and help support these dudes. I'll call you right back across the board as usual. We're keeping it going with the creepy theme in October. And, you know, check out the website. Got some new T-shirts and everything. But thanks for listening, and I'll call you right back.